What's he taking?
Aha! There you are!
Hey, what's he doing?
He's at it again!
For anyone who took one look at the title and thumbnail of this video and immediately asked, why? The answer is that I've spent the last year making comprehensive breakdowns for all previous Toy Story movies in the lead up to the premiere of the 5th film back in June. The only exception being Toy Story 4 because, well, I've already spoken about Toy Story 4 for 6 hours, 6 minutes, and 51 seconds, not counting the many snipes fired at it in my other videos. I don't imagine anyone was expecting or hoping I would retread old ground for something that has been praised, criticized, and debated to the ends of the earth, but the old ground in this particular case is a poorly researched, poorly articulated, haphazardly edited, and intolerably venomous rant that's overwhelmingly comprised of highlighting logical discrepancies or breaches in continuity, many of which had no substantive impact on anything or anyone, as well as being generally tedious to listen to. Does it really matter that much the reason Woody and Bo are able to have this conversation is that a guy forgot his car keys? Do I really need to reiterate for the 100 millionth time that this movie is full of baloney? And were the decisions to change Bo Peep's personality or the material of her dress or to put a driveway somewhere it never existed before acts of gaslighting on the parts of the filmmakers? No, of course not, and to claim otherwise the way I did before is to trivialize the real-life abuse that word is associated with. They were just retcons. Plain and simple. They changed those things to align better with the story they wanted to tell, which mattered more to them than maintaining absolute verisimilitude. That's all that happened here. But none of that mattered to me 5 years ago because I wasn't interested in simply sharing my perspective on Toy Story 4. I was literally throwing everything I had at the movie to mercilessly tear every frame of it to shreds, actively looking for things that didn't make sense no matter how big or small they may have been, all to try to prove the film was bad, thereby obfuscating the much smaller list of major problems, be them character beats, thematic strokes, or plot points which actually did deeply upset me, and stubbornly refusing to acknowledge there might actually be some things Toy Story 4 managed to do very well, instead claiming the people who made it were ego-driven, brain-dead morons and that you must be a clinical idiot or a liar if you defended the film on any level. Whereas if you ask me today, I tell you that is an incredibly childish and toxic way to look at media, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with liking Toy Story 4. There's a difference between intentionally playing up your emotions for the sake of entertainment and whatever kind of unhinged meltdown I was having in those videos, discussing the film with others on live streams, or wasting hours of everyone's time on pointless Twitter arguments and YouTube comment flame wars. How Toy Story 4 destroyed everything was born out of pure, unadulterated spite, culminating in a psychotic tirade that practically painted the film's director, Josh Cooley, as a demon, maliciously attacking the sanctity of Toy Story when in reality the series I made was far more scathing and malicious than anything he or his team ever created with this movie. It's clear the team poured their hearts and souls into every last pixel of every last frame to make something they thought was amazing. This movie didn't deserve the treatment I gave it, nor did the people who created it, so I figure it's only right to revisit Toy Story 4 one last time, with a far less epileptic, far less visually and auditorily redundant, far less nitpicky, far less mean-spirited, and a marginally shorter video that more concisely explains the bigger reasons why this movie made me so mad without turning it into a personal hit piece on its director, giving a more contemporary perspective on the movie and how my relationship with it has changed since first making my series, and generally seeing if I still absolutely despise Toy Story 4 with the burning intensity of 1,000 supernova explosions, with timestamps in the description, as always, for your viewing convenience. This is my final reckoning with Toy Story 4. Let me start by straight up acknowledging the biases I had toward this film leading up to its release in summer of 2019. By which I mean, Apart from when I walked out of the theater for Toy Story 3 at 7 years old and just wanted more of the thing that I liked, I never wanted to see Toy Story 4 get made in the first place. Nor did most other people, for fear of watching yet another near-perfect trilogy be needlessly grave-robbed and tarnished, but I was a step beyond the average person in that department. Slowly evolving from, "Hey, it'd be really cool to see more of these characters," to, "Man, I really don't know if it's a good idea to continue this story," to, "This is a blight on humanity that I already vigorously despise." I took any chance I had to make my displeasure known, both on and off the internet, declaring it was going to be bad before we'd even seen a single frame of the movie. I had a Toy Story 4 review titled, "The Worst and Most Unnecessary Pixar Sequel," partially written, recorded, and edited 3 months ahead of the film's release. And my junior year high school declamation speech was all about how much I hated the movie was being made 4 months before it came out. And yet, I still went to see it in theaters on opening day. Because, truthfully, although I was upset Toy Story 3's perfect ending would no longer be the definitive conclusion for the series, I still had a piece of that little kid deep down inside somewhere who wanted to give it a chance, and was excited to watch another Toy Story adventure up on the big screen for what I, at the time anyway, thought might really be the last time, but would definitely be the last time before I went off to college myself. In that sense, I almost felt more emotionally prepared to say goodbye to these characters than I was when Toy Story 3 came out. I felt a deeper and more intimate connection to Woody, Buzz, Jessie, and the rest of the toys than anybody from any other media I had been exposed to. In fact, I was so excited to see this movie that when my family and I got to the theater, I just ran straight into the auditorium and left them behind in the concessions line because I didn't want to miss a single second of the experience. And as much as I hate to admit it, the opening music worked wonders on me. I couldn't help but smile ear to ear because with just those 6 notes, I was immediately taken right back to when I was a kid watching Toy Story 2 and meeting the Roundup Gang for the first time. All the pessimism and cynicism I'd adopted over those last few months vanished in an instant, and I was fully prepared for Pixar to surprise me with a respectful continuation of a story and characters that meant the world to me. And you might be surprised to hear that, on first viewing, Pixar had me right where they wanted me for almost the entire movie. I'd say like 90% of it, I was completely on the same page as the film. Now, being 16 years old and generally uncritical of the media I'd consumed up until that point probably didn't help matters all that much, but seeing all the classic characters in Andy's room, blasting nostalgic music in my ears, showcasing some of the most mesmerizingly impressive visuals and striking cinematography I'd ever seen in an animated movie, capping off with "You've Got a Friend in Me," effortlessly guiding us all the way through the story of Woody's life back to where we are today. It all did such a good job of making me feel like a kid in a candy store that things which by all accounts should have annoyed me to no end didn't faze me one bit, and I found myself crying on 3 separate occasions because of how invested I was, riding the emotional high of all the goodwill they'd built up all the way to the end of the line. I think you know how the story goes from here.
Thank you for destroying the ending in Toy Story 3. I'm so happy you were so money hungry that you couldn't just leave well enough alone.
This right here is the moments that actually broke me. When I'd finally run out of disposable copium to huff, and the illusion I'd so easily fallen for over the last hour and 26 minutes shattered like a mirror in Shrek's swamp, leaving me in such a stunned state of disbelief when the credits finally rolled that I legitimately felt bolted to the chair, unable to move as I just sat there in brooding silence, struggling to process my emotions and rationalize what I had just watched, trying to figure out how and why I'd been catapulted into a totally different story right at the finish line with no warning or build-up, even though it shouldn't have come as a surprise to me because I'd twigged exactly what kind of shenanigans this movie was playing at from the moment the trailer came out. twice. The whole experience left such a significant impact on me that every detail of the day, from the games I played that morning and evening to the college we toured and restaurant we ate at prior to going to the theater, all of it was burned into my brain the same way my first viewing of Toy Story 3 stuck with me, but for totally opposite reasons. It really felt like watching Woody leave everyone behind had inflicted the same damage upon me that the characters themselves had sustained. Now, what a normal person would do upon having such a reaction to a film is to obviously never watch it again and simply move on with their lives. Yet I didn't. The moment it was available to buy on Blu-ray, I rented it from Redbox, may they rest in peace, and gave it another go. Then I tried it again with my family during Thanksgiving when it came to Disney Plus, and I just kept watching this movie, knowing full well how I felt about it and how distraught it made me because I was desperate to have the full emotional experience so many other people seem to be getting out of the film. Same reason I never bothered finishing that original review video. After spending the last few months watching from afar as Star Wars and Game of Thrones were both raked over the coals before being driven off a cliff and then promptly nuked, and also Marvel, depending on who you ask, I didn't want to have to admit the same thing had happened to a series I was actually invested in. I thought, the movie made me cry, and I initially enjoyed watching a lot of it, so there has to be some value in all that, right? Maybe I just need to watch it one more time. But each and every time I tried to revisit the film, it brought forth the exact same roller coaster ride with the exact same peaks and valleys I experienced on June 21st, 2019. That's the real reason why I wanted to make How Toy Story 4 Destroyed Everything. I didn't do video essays or reviews back then. I was a Let's Player. Those were the types of videos people expected from me. But I still felt I needed to make peace with how I felt about this film, because even though I outwardly told everyone I despised it, I don't think I consciously realized what I was really feeling. I knew I was missing something, I just didn't know what it was. So when I listened to the director's commentary in which they confessed to the story not making any sense, when I discovered Toy Story 4's delay was indirectly responsible for Incredibles 2 being the mess that it was, and when I identified all these clear, undeniable contradictions and breaches in logic, I thought I'd cracked the code on what had been bothering me about Toy Story 4, that I'd seen through the film's facade by which all the masses had been blinded and at long last was able to let all those feelings off my chest that had been bubbling up inside me for 2 years and finally move forward with my life. But every word of that conclusion was wrong, because I may have laid out the film's alphabet, but I was still a long way away from learning the ABCs of me. Somewhere along the way of making that series, I convinced myself I harbored this deep, seething hatred for Toy Story 4 when I was really just looking for something tangible to cling on to justify these complicated feelings I was having. I deluded myself into believing that even just thinking about the movie brought nothing but pain and agony, and I never wanted to look at, talk about, or watch it again when... Obviously, that wasn't true. Like, people who truly despise any given movie don't then go on to watch it 14 times. But that's what I became known as. The world's biggest Toy Story 4 hater. Hell, I practically gave myself that label with how incessantly I brought it up to people, and I quickly became caught in a self-fulfilling prophecy I was unable to escape from, as any efforts I may have wanted to make to give this film a more proper analysis were undermined by my perpetual desire to lean into the heated persona I'd unintentionally developed, hence why the crown jewel of my worst movies of all time list was none other than Toy Story 4, and why I gave it a 1 out of 10 in the audio commentary. I don't really do number scores anymore because I find the whole system to be somewhat arbitrary and contingent on any individual person's scale, but by no reasonable metric could Toy Story 4 ever genuinely be considered a 1 out of 10 film, or called a wretched sequence of sounds and images stitched together into a motion picture and decreed to be the worst movie ever made, because that would essentially mean it fails from every conceivable element of filmmaking and is borderline storyline incomprehensible, which this movie most certainly is not. In fact, I would actually say the scene where Bonnie goes to her kindergarten orientation has a lot of genuine merit to it. I might even go as far as to say that it does a stellar job of portraying the experience of a kid going to school for the very first time from the minute Bonnie comes bursting into her room and we just hear her quietly sobbing under the bed. They always use these uncomfortably close and low camera angles capturing the anguish on her face, showing how daunting this new environment is for someone her age and how small she feels in comparison to everyone else, being left on her own by inattentive or overwhelmed teachers and feeling like the other kids already have everything figured out. It's one-to-one, exactly what I went through on my first ever day of school, so I connect with Bonnie's plight on a deeply personal level, and this is, without a doubt, the rawest and most effective scene of the entire film, which everyone around the world can connect with from school experiences they either previously lived or are currently living through. But more than any of that, it feels perfectly at home with the other Toy Story movies. It has that heart, that willingness to hold on the inelegant and the sad. It's in line with how its two starring characters previously behaved, as Woody would of course move heaven and earth to look out for his kid, and although Bonnie has experience going to class at Sunnyside, her mom was still always a room away if she needed her, making this the first time she's ever truly been left by herself, without anyone she knows and trusts to lean on for support. Now, you better hold on to your hats, folks, because there's actually quite a bit of other stuff I've come to appreciate about Toy Story 4 over the years. For a few rapid-fire examples, getting legendary actors like Carol Burnett, Mel Brooks, Carl Reiner, and Betty White on board is pretty neat. Undercutting the excitement of a more traditional Toy Story rescue sequence by forcing us to say goodbye to Bo and providing a sense of closure for her character we never got with Toy Story 3 is devastatingly effective. Hearing Woody say "shoots and ladders" feels like a continuation of retooling more abrasive verbiage through a toy's perspective.
F.A.O. my Schwartz.
In much the same way, the Second Chance Antique Shop, and specifically the dummies who inhabit it, feel like a return to the creepier aesthetic from the first movie, which had fallen by the wayside in subsequent sequels. Though the best example of harkening back to the early days is probably Forky, as he creates an interesting parallel with Buzz Lightyear in that we once again have a strenuous dynamic between someone who knows the way the world works and a delusional buffoon, but this time with a character born from nothing but the love and imagination of a child as opposed to Buzz's inherently commercialized nature. I made a pretty big deal in my original series about how much Forky breaks the world building, but this would be a primary example of what I mean when I say I was literally throwing everything I had at the movie. Did I think it was an extremely weird choice to put a spork front and center when the teaser first came out? Yeah, absolutely, but when I actually watched the film, the character did not negatively impact my viewing experience in any way whatsoever, and I was definitely being willfully ignorant trying to pretend there were never any world-building problems with the original trilogy, and overly reductive asking questions in the vein of, well, could you throw googly eyes onto the ground and make the planet come to life? Doesn't mean it's not still interesting to think about, you know, the endless rabbit hole of how sentient toys would impact the wider world of Toy Story, but as far as the core stories themselves, the plot, characters, and themes weren't in any way contingent on understanding the finer details of how the universe functions. Revisiting this film in 2026, I would first of all like to praise Tony Hale for doing a stellar job portraying such a lunatic and still managing to make him endearing, and second of all, amend my position in that I now actually find it kind of beautiful that you don't have to be made in a factory to be considered a sentient toy, since fundamentally, they're all the result of assembling random disjointed materials together into a larger whole with the intention of being played with. There's no reason it should be any different in a child's hands than in the hands of a factory worker. Though it is kinda strange Woody has never encountered another arts and crafts toy at any point since the 1950s, and that life wasn't granted to the cardboard box Bonnie turned into a spaceship toy, which we know she still plays with. As for Bo's new demeanor, it's actually perfectly fine throughout the bulk of Toy Story 4. As a matter of fact, I actually think this movie has a far more substantive and mature, for lack of a better term, girl power moments than Disney's other attempts at doing this in 2019, which are some of the most eye-rollingly self-serving please clap moments I've ever seen, and also somewhat embarrassing because you guys nailed it in Infinity War. What happened here? But Bo doesn't give off that vibe. It makes complete sense why she's acting like this, and it's a really smart move to have Woody and Bo find each other again while still stuck in toy mode. This is a type of reunion scene you cannot have in any other franchise. It's a beautifully original Toy Story moment and allows the audience to feel the emotions of these characters without them even moving a muscle. Then there's Gabby, which, look, you can't top Lotso. There's simply no way. You cannot out-evil a sadistic dictator who condemned Andy's toys to one of the most horrifically painful deaths imaginable. So Pixar correctly realized there was no point in even trying, and deliberately designed Gabby to be the total inverse of all previous Toy Story villains who, while all being very distinct from each other in terms of personality, motivation, and behavior, were also all unified by an inherently flawed worldview regarding the relationship between toys and their kids. But Gabby fully understands how valuable the love of a child is, which is a wonderfully fresh take on what the dynamic between Woody and the villain could look like, and redeeming a character who shares such strong overlap with the hero by the end sounds like a really good idea, as does having Duke's tragic backstory be rooted in a misleading commercial, as that's also a concept previously unexplored by the movie. And it kinda goes without saying that Toy Story 4 might legitimately be the most visually stunning animated movie that has ever been released. Even in recent years, I don't think I've seen anything nearly as jaw-droppingly gorgeous as this film, and the increased visual fidelity works especially well for the prologue, where because of how much time and money went into the sequence, you can really feel the scale of the toys when seeing how enormous the raindrops are in comparison. It enhances that concept of seeing the world from a toy's point of view, which we've had since the very first movie. The soundtrack also has its fair share of original compositions which feel right at home with the musical language of the series, and even when it does reuse tracks, it's sometimes done with very careful intent, such as the Soldier's Mission theme playing when Woody goes back to help Gabby, because as we learned before, no toy ever gets left behind. Finally, the thing I respect about Toy Story 4 more than anything else is that it does not in any way feel like an overly sanitized cash grab. That may have been why it was initially greenlit, because, well, duh. But clearly the filmmakers themselves were interested in more than just going through the motions or playing it safe. They decided that if Disney was hell-bent on undercutting the emotional weight of Toy Story 3's finale, they may as well give it their all and come up with a worthwhile premise to justify the movie's existence. To push the boundaries of what people expected out of this franchise. To make their distinctive mark on Toy Story while still staying firmly rooted in the franchise's origins. And that is a level of artistic integrity and commitment I cannot possibly disrespect, when it would have been so easy for them to churn out some soulless corporate slop made with absolutely zero creativity or imagination or general competent artistic direction anywhere to be found to rake in easy money with as little effort as humanly possible. Which is just working out so well for them. Thing is, nearly all of the stuff I can point to as being worthy of appreciation also comes with some kind of massive caveat. For instance, it's cool they got all these veteran actors on board, but they're barely in the movie and their characters only exist to hammer home how useless Woody is. The chutes and ladders joke is the only example of that kind of soft swearing in the entire film. The creepy vibes only last for about 5 seconds before we leap ahead to sunrise and the dummies devolve into slapstick comedy machines for every subsequent scene, as is the case for Forky, whose existential crisis is over 10 minutes after it begins, at which point he becomes nothing but a plot device. Like, I get that they wanted to keep this part of the movie lighthearted before things became really heavy towards the endgame, but I kinda wish it wasn't as lighthearted and they leaned more heavily into the existentialism than they did. It's not like that would have been out of place for the series. Not to get too far ahead of myself, but I really don't like how Gabby's emotions are taken more seriously than a character who doesn't want to be alive and never has his existential crisis seriously examined at any point, instead being routinely treated as the butt of the joke, in spite of her being far less sympathetic. Also, as much as I find the idea of Forky beautiful, that doesn't change the fact that it's still incredibly sloppy to make his very existence a pivotal part of the story such that it cannot unfold without him, to treat his creation as the groundbreaking uprooting of the other toys' worldview,
I have all the questions.
then turn around and say,
I don't think we should explain it. That's a little too midichlorian for me.
I think Forky's last line in the movie is actually, "I don't know."
Exactly. And that's the answer. I don't know.
because if you are not prepared to have the conversation about what distinguishes an inanimate object from a living toy and how sentience works in this universe, then maybe don't create a movie that entirely revolves around an inanimate object who clearly is not supposed to be a toy miraculously becoming sentient. And finally, for as undeniably beautiful as this movie looks, these photorealistic textures and lighting schemes feel dramatically out of place in every scene that isn't the prologue. I don't know about you guys, but I never came to the Toy Story series for hyper-realistic imagery. I come to these movies to see a world I can't experience by simply looking outside my window. That's part of what made the first movie's art direction so appealing. These intentionally stylized plastic characters the artists knew their software was better at rendering. Even as their technology became more sophisticated for the sequels, they never pivoted away from the plasticky aesthetic of the world, nor did they lose the vibrant color palette even in the darkest and most dour of locations. Ratatouille and WALL-E proved beyond a shadow of a doubt hyperrealism was within Pixar's grasp, yet they still demonstrated remarkable restraint when it came to blending their cartoonish designs with a more visually elegant world, resulting in Toy Story 3 being the perfect fusion that it was. Models were more advanced, textures were more detailed, lighting, shading, and everything in between were all refined to a T in ways that simply weren't possible in the 90s, but without crossing too far into reality and losing the whimsical charm of the series' artistic identity. Toy Story 4, on the other hand, seems exclusively interested in flexing how much more advanced their technology has become over the years, and on that front, they absolutely succeeded. But that's not anywhere near as interesting to me as what the first three movies accomplished, because this insistence on making everything as realistic as possible significantly harms the film's ability to create environments that truly pop off the screen or standout lighting schemes that pull you into the world. Pizza Planet is striking, Al's Toy Barn and the airport are overwhelming, Sunnyside can either be warm and welcoming or your worst nightmare, and the dump is screaming danger around every corner. These are all iconic Toy Story locations no one will ever forget because of how immersive the sharp designs and spellbinding lighting are, but Second Chance Antiques is as dull and uninspired as it can possibly be. It's extremely claustrophobic and small, unlike the airport, it doesn't commit to its horror vibes, unlike Sid's house, and it doesn't have the same luminous color palette that Sunnyside did, apart from these thinly veiled tech demos purposely built to catch your attention in promotional material, nor does it provide a complex layout and dynamic defense system allowing for intense action sequences, once again, unlike the daycare. A point that was raised by YouTuber Blaze Rona I hadn't considered about the antique store was that it kind of acts as a shifty, dangerous toy city with a very bustling nighttime scene, and Gabby taking Woody along for a carriage ride gives off the same vibes as a mob boss taking someone in the back of a limo, perhaps trying to corner the market on toy supplies such as Woody's voice box. But as they also point out in their video, this dynamic is not explored with anywhere near the same level of depth or intrigue as something like Lotso's dictatorship at Sunnyside, which makes it all feel like a massive missed opportunity and a generally uninteresting location to explore. By the way, if you haven't already watched this video, you absolutely should, even as someone who's Well, it tackled a lot of topics in ways I hadn't previously considered, which made it both an insightful and hilariously entertaining viewing experience. I'll link it down in the description below. Now, where was I? Oh yeah, the shitty little antique store. You'd at least think the store would become darker and more menacing the deeper into the film you get to complement the more dangerous stakes, but it actually gets even brighter because using the atmosphere to help convey the mood of a scene is an objective that runs entirely secondary to maintaining absolute photorealism no matter the cost. When Toy Story 4 came out, people talked a lot about how lifelike this cat looked in comparison to Scud, but now nobody remembers the cat. Nobody knows what the cat's name is. Did you even know it had a name?
Where dragon roams.
But nobody's ever gonna forget what Scud looks like or what his role was in the first film, because whether you love his uncanny design or hate it, he left an undeniable impact on both the franchise and the audiences who fell in love with Toy Story. Similarly, they place so much emphasis on this panning carnival shot being a Ratatouille-esque reveal, but although it may look more technically impressive than similar shots from previous movies, in the context of the actual story, it falls completely flat because there's nothing here Woody hasn't already seen on a far greater scale. And there is no better point of comparison than how they updated Andy's model for Toy Story 3 without compromising his base design versus how they updated him for Toy Story 4. And by that I mean kidnapped him in the dead of night and replaced him with a gelatinous imposter who you would never believe is supposed to be Andy were it not for the cowboy hat. I know a lot of this ultimately comes down to personal preference, but for a series that's always been infused with childlike wonder and imagination, and whose most famous sequences excel not because of how real they look, but because of how deliberate choices in both color and lighting help stir up such intense emotions from the audience, I will always prefer the more stylized world from the original trilogy than I will the excessive naturalism of Toy Story 4 because of how much personality was lost in order to achieve that. To put it simply, it doesn't look like Toy Story anymore. It does sound like Toy Story, as I mentioned earlier, but in comes the caveat to spoil the fun, as the original compositions I previously praised are few and far between and still cannot hold a candle to the raw power of a track like The Claw, or the delicate bittersweetness of So Long. As was helpfully pointed out by the comments on the official music uploads, there is a grating overabundance of music recycled from the original trilogy, resulting in the score lacking any kind of musical identity of its own. Operation Poltoy, for instance, barely has a minute's worth of audio throughout its 5-minute duration that isn't repurposed, and that is consistent for nearly every other piece on the soundtrack. And lest we not forget,
You got a friend in me.
literally just copy and paste it into the timeline without remixing it in any interesting way like Toy Story 2 did not once but twice. Now, reusing old music is not something specific to Toy Story 4, nor is it inherently a sinful act. Many are quick to point out that Toy Story 3 is also guilty of doing this to a certain extent, including reincorporating the vanilla version of You've Got a Friend in Me. The key difference, however, is that the ratio of new melodies to old in that film is about 9-1 rather than the other way around, and the times in which music is reused are either with specific narrative intent, such as during the staff meeting to help further highlight how much things have changed, or at the end when they return to Andy's house to reinforce they are finally safe and sound after all the terrors they've just conquered, or even the opening home video montage, which uses the nostalgic feelings that would inevitably be generated by playing such an iconic song to create an emotional juxtaposition when we flash forward to the future.
A friendship will never die.
Either that or the classic music is played so briefly it's almost not even worth calling attention to, such as the opening notes when the logo burns. some amount of remixing is to be expected, if not outright warranted given the film's mission statement of creating a sense of finality for the trilogy and bringing everything full circle to where it all began. But you only get to use this trick once. Each time you return to this well, it becomes decreasingly effective until eventually reaching a point where my only reaction is to roll my eyes straight out of my head. Particularly when you don't utilize any clever subversion like this and just play the theme music completely straight. You can't just take Woody's Finest Hour or Buzz's video game themes and arbitrarily plop them wherever you want when they were both originally composed with the express purpose of emphasizing each character's respective journey throughout Toy Story 2. You can't just play the music from the Shredder sequence when Woody is running from the dummies, because hearing something this dramatic when facing enemies this goofy creates a distractingly radical tonal mismatch. Same reason you can't just play the music from Woody and Buzz's final triumphant charge toward the moving van during a random skunkmobile ride through the carnival. But by far the worst offender is the melody from when the Claw rescues the toys in the incinerator, which might be my favorite piece of music in the entire series, being used as emotional backing for the finale of Toy Story 4. These tracks weren't created in a vacuum, they were designed for very specific moments in very specific scenes to create a holistic audiovisual cinematic experience. Notice how Buzz's acrobatics are in perfect synchronization with the beats of this track from Toy Story 3. Now notice how those visuals are missing in Toy Story 4 because it's a completely different scene, so now it just feels awkward to listen to the song reach its climax. Though perhaps not quite as awkward as it is to listen to the vocal tracks, which is a shame because, melodically speaking, I actually find them both to be quite catchy in two totally different ways. I enjoy the bouncy energy of Randy Newman's I Can't Let You Throw Yourself Away, and given I'm something of a country fan myself, I enjoy the slow-paced melancholy of Chris Stapleton's Ballad of the Lonesome Cowboy just as much, so long as I never ever think about the lyrics for even a second.
I was a lonesome cowboy. I didn't have a friend.
Am I chopped liver?
No, that's what I am.
And the less said about that other song, the better. We're dealing with a character who literally wants to throw himself away, who's mortally terrified and would rather meet a grueling demise as a piece of garbage than live the life of a toy Woody and Bonnie blessed him with. But then you have this jovial music in the background to complement that conflict, which I don't know, the song itself is actually really inspirational, but setting this storyline against such an upbeat instrumental just seems like a strange emotional whiplash, and making light of Forky wanting to go to the trash feels especially tone-deaf after the climax of Toy Story 3, but clearly Pixar disagrees.
Whoa, okay, let me get this straight. A giant claw comes down and saves you. Andy gives you to Bonnie, and then a fork leads you to Bo.
Yeah, more or less.
Ha! That's nothing.
Yeah, I mean, coming inches away from burning alive minutes after coming millimeters away from being torn to pieces minutes after nearly being crushed to death minutes after being tortured and imprisoned. No biggie. In a way, I almost respect the brazen audacity to double down on the striking unlikability of Bo and her crew with this short film. I never really had any strong feelings about Bo Peep one way or the other when I was a kid, which is why I wasn't particularly heartbroken to see she was gone in Toy Story 3. But now? It may make sense for Bo Peep to adopt this more adventurous personality for the bulk of the film, but it absolutely does not make sense for her to act like this during the opening prologue which precedes the lifestyle changes necessitating her shift in attitude. Of course, it's obvious why Pixar would have made this choice. They wanted to cater to general audiences who don't remember the first two movies all that well, or haven't seen them in a while, and they thought it would be easier to convince them this wasn't a radical character transformation if they pretended she was always this headstrong and mission capable, even though that clearly was never the case.
She's gone through a tremendous transformation. even in the way she dresses.
The whole idea of this opening prologue is to bring people back into the Toy Story world in an environment they're familiar with before blowing the doors open on what they really want to do with these characters. So would it not stand to further bolster that objective by having Bo act the way she always did in the first two movies during the flashback to fully demonstrate how much the outside world has changed her when we catch up to the present instead of confusing people out of the gates, thereby achieving the opposite effect? Although confusing people might have actually been a supplementary objective here, because presumably if you set out to create a prologue prominently featuring Bo Peep, you might be interested in showing the exact reason why she wasn't present in Toy Story 3 and setting up how she's going to return for the rest of Toy Story 4. But while it does achieve that first task, even if it's contradictory to what was previously believed to be true, it fails the second because where she shows up later in the movie has no connection whatsoever to where she's taken in the flashback.
But we knew it was important to set up who she is, what she looks like, where she's been.
Okay, but you guys didn't actually do that. They don't find her at this family's house later. They find her on a random playground in the middle of nowhere. You could honestly trim this prologue out of the film entirely and still perfectly understand what's going on with Bo because she already exposits how she became a lost toy to Woody later. This story Woody shares with Giggle about Molly is actually one of my favorite moments in the film because it's a rare moment of reflection for a character who's been hardened after years of fighting for survival as a lost toy. But it would have been so much more emotional if we'd actually seen what he's talking about with Molly being soothed by Bo's light, because we've never seen that before. It was invented specifically for this movie. What if instead of nostalgia baiting people with You've Got a Friend in Me, you make Molly and Bo the focus of the prologue, showing how bad things were for Molly in the early days as she cried herself to sleep every night before Bo came into her life and brightened everyone's days. Then the montage could show Molly growing up before eventually donating Bo and letting us follow her journey around the world before eventually linking back up to the present. Unfortunately, we instead spend the prologue on entirely unrelated filler action and a donation that goes nowhere and sequester the actually relevant backstory into a stupid Disney Plus short. I honestly don't even know why they put this scene here. It's so strange to see Bo fondly reminiscing about her time with Molly and being motivated to rescue Forky after remembering how valuable the relationship between a toy and a kid is, when we later see she actually doesn't believe in any of that anymore and is fully on board the lost toy train. I thought maybe this would be setting up the idea that Bo secretly does miss being Molly's toy and that's why she's roaming the world searching for new kids to play with, but clearly she doesn't give a damn about any of that. It's bizarre. The way the prologue is written now raises more questions than it seeks to answer, and also makes both Woody and Bo come off as inconsistent during this scene under the car. In the first two Toy Story movies, Woody learns a valuable lesson about how Andy still cares for him, and Bo already had both lessons down pat, even when Woody was still struggling to catch up. She was 10 steps ahead of his development the whole time. She knows perfectly well how much Andy and Woody mean to each other, as well as his other friends like Buzz and Jessie, and yet she still tries to make him come with her at the start of Toy Story 4 with no thought spared for any of those characters because as far as she's concerned,
I'm not Andy's toy.
but we see her being played with by Andy way more often than we see her being played with by Molly, that being literally never, so why does this even matter? And to hell with all the other toys, right? She was there for when Woody was either lost by Andy or otherwise mysteriously disappeared, and she saw how it completely consumed Buzz, as well as how severely it impacted Andy's happiness until Woody was back home safe and sound in both cases. This is a wholly selfish plan Bo Peep would simply never suggest, and it's inconceivable for Woody to even consider it when one movie later he would go on to rake his friends over the coals for pursuing selfish interests over being with their kid, and one movie earlier he promised he'd be with his old pal Buzz Lightyear
For infinity and beyond.
This prologue cannot be taking place that long after Toy Story 2, since Toy Story 4 takes place a year after Toy Story 3, in which Bonnie was 4 and Andy was 17, so a year later Andy would be 18 years old, and 9 years prior to that would put him at 9 years old in the flashback, and since Andy was 6 years old at the start of the first movie, a week before his summertime birthday where he will turn 7, then he's either already 8 or almost 8 by the time we reach Toy Story 2, since that takes place the following summer, which means this flashback has to be taking place roughly a year after Woody's journey with the Roundup Gang, and yet he's still trying to pull a fast one on us? This is a joke, right? I still cannot believe the only reason he doesn't abandon everyone here is because Andy happened to run outside at this exact second. And to be fair, it's not like Woody and Bo weren't close. They absolutely had a serious bond. He frequently leaned on her for support in times of emotional crisis, but there was nowhere near enough of a connection to justify him nearly betraying his loyalty to Andy. You'd have a better shot of convincing me of that if Buzz was the one asking him to leave, since we at least witnessed firsthand everything they'd been through together, but even then, he'd still never do it.
But we knew it was important to set up, most importantly, the relationship she has with Woody.
Oops, sorry, I think you misspoke there. I believe the phrase you're searching for is completely change the relationship to make this story easier to buy into. Still though, that is just the prologue, and like I said earlier, her more confident personality makes sense for the main chunk of the movie. But I also said earlier that nearly every positive I have for Toy Story 4 comes with an enormous caveat. While this was clearly done to try and correct the mistakes of the past and make her a more properly developed character as opposed to simply being Woody's love interest, given that during the early days of the studio, their films, for as great as they are, were much more heavily skewed in favor of their male characters, the caveat here is that, for one thing, I am entirely unable to see this as anything other than hollow pandering by a corporation who will contort their socially conscious decision-making at the drop of a hat in accordance with whatever they believe to be most financially viable for them at any given time, and absolutely zero additional factors. I cannot possibly take any advancements of perceived inclusivity seriously when writing duo Rashida Jones and Will McCormick left the Toy Story 4 team and Pixar as a whole, specifically citing women and people of color lacking an equal creative voice as being the reason for their departure. Something which, to be absolutely clear, Pixar has obviously made great strides in improving since then. And for another, I don't actually think her portrayal in this film is anywhere near as progressive as Disney wants you to believe it is. If you wanted to put a female character in the spotlight for the next Toy Story sequel and you wanted them to be very acrobatic and combative and outspoken and aggressive, then can you give me a single solitary reason in our entire plane of existence why you didn't just give Jessie a bigger role instead of concocting all this rigmarole to justify fluffing up Bo Peep's character instead? You know what was really cool about these two ladies? That they weren't exactly the same. The original trilogy showed kids there wasn't just one type of woman who was allowed to be awesome. Given Bo's limited mobility and delicate material, she accomplished things very differently than Jessie did, and that's okay because everybody on this planet has very different strengths and weaknesses.
One of the things that I really enjoyed about Bo was she always felt porcelain, and as a result, she always felt very reserved.
I imagine a lot of young girls would see themselves as the feisty and courageous Jessie, while many others would identify more with the wiser but more soft-spoken Bo Peep, and neither of them was inherently more worthy of being represented than the other. But Toy Story 4 systematically stamped out that personality from Bo, and now there's only one scene where she gets to use her wordsmith skills.
This was an important scene for Woody to see Bo just taking charge here and able to turn Duke from just crying like a baby to having the confidence to just be who he is. Woody is constantly watching what's going on here. He's taking all this in.
As if Woody wouldn't already know this about Bo from the first two movies, but whatever. Then for the entire rest of the movie, Bo's back to being a generic action hero wielding a big stick. And I'm sorry, but you aren't promoting female empowerment by implying women have to live up to this fierce, action-centric archetype to be accepted and represented on the big screen.
She's a woman for the new times.
If anything, you're doing the exact opposite by making it seem like the more reserved personality of Bo Peep was an error that needed to be fixed because for some reason Disney deluded themselves into believing this is the only way you can show that female characters are just as capable as male characters, which is ridiculous because every single one of you watching this video can point to countless examples from other media of your favorite female characters who do not at all cleanly fit into that very specific generic warrior paradigm. Even when exclusively looking at characters who are more acrobatic and warrior-like, or at least physically powerful in some capacity, they usually have some personality or emotional vulnerability beneath that to allow the audience to connect and empathize with them beyond their physical capabilities. But Bo Peep doesn't have anything like that, and even when they tease otherwise, they don't follow up on it because we can't ever risk letting her guard down for even a moment lest that vulnerability be mistaken for weakness, which could have been an interesting part of her character to explore. But they didn't. It's so infuriating that the only way they can make Bo seem awesome is by making everyone else seem helpless in comparison, which was not a problem they had when introducing Jessie. Bear with me for a moment as I point you to another one of my favorite franchises, Mission Impossible, and specifically Fallout, which is the best Mission Impossible film, by the way, because it prominently features both a highly trained and physically threatening super spy as well as a more apprehensive but highly intelligent, empathetic medical worker, fulfilling similar narrative roles to what was originally intended for Bo Peep and Jessie in Toy Story, and has them both serve a vital purpose in the dismantling of the villain's plot, as without both women being present in Kashmir, the team never would have been able to save the day. Meanwhile, what's Jessie doing in Toy Story 4? Oh yeah, nothing! She pops a tire with a nail and then tries to lawnmower her way through a carnival full of children. Zippity fucking doodah.
I have an idea!
And even if you ignore all the meta context surrounding this decision, within this specific universe, you may have chosen the worst possible character to do this to from both a physical and emotional perspective. Physically, to be frank, it is patently unbelievable Bo Peep would behave like a ragdoll upon being tossed around, even though she is a fragile porcelain doll who should have shattered to pieces no less than 17 times over. Do you know why she was left back in Andy's room in Toy Story 2, even though she would be more strongly motivated to rescue Woody than some of the other toys? Quote, "It had also been hard to find a place for Bo Peep in Toy Story 2, which is why she appears only at the beginning and end of the film. The filmmakers felt audiences wouldn't accept a porcelain lamp going off into the city and having an adventure. They even joked that she might roll herself in bubble wrap and FedEx herself to Al's apartment."
When I heard Bo Peep was going to be a main character, I was kind of surprised.
What are we gonna do? She's porcelain, she's very limited in her movements. How are you gonna make that character work?
It's such a stark contrast to Toy Story 3, where the animators took such great care in how they refined each toy's movement to account for their unique designs, most notable in how Ken and Barbie's movement is far more stilted and restricted than the others. You notice how they didn't have any problem making Barbie a strong, capable, intelligent, and also emotionally sensible character while still allowing her to believably move the way a doll like her would? Perhaps you can suspend your disbelief over this, but I don't know, it seemed pretty important to the director and producer.
And she's porcelain. We never forgot the fact that she's porcelain.
Yeah? No, but you know, her arm broke off once and her sheep lost a single toe. We did it, Patrick. We fixed the script. And emotionally, the praise I mentioned previously regarding her characterization begins and ends at the independence and confidence she would naturally develop from living as a lost toy. Bo Peep never, ever used to be this boorish and inconsiderate. In fact, it was the opposite. She was always the most compassionate, the most in tune with how their kid was feeling, the most willing to rush to defend Woody's innocence despite all evidence to the contrary. Now she's toying with his emotions, making him think her arm is actually broken for good instead of trying to calm him down, even knowing the history he has with this sort of thing. Which is, you know, a little bit bizarre.
She's lived a life and she can fix herself, where Woody has always been kind of a, don't break me.
Why are you like this? And she's flabbergasted by the idea of Woody not being a lost toy, even though she should know full well how staunchly loyal he always was. You know, why use this as an opportunity to establish that Beau's disappointed he still has a kid, because otherwise it would have meant she wouldn't have to be lonely anymore, when instead we can just have her demonstrate she retained absolutely nothing from the time she spent with Woody at Andy's house.
Oh, Woody. If only you could see how much Andy misses you.
Oh, kids lose toys every day. Bonnie will get over it.
It's not just Woody either. Beau even behaves this poorly to her sheep.
Why are you so bad at driving? You got 6 eyes.
Gee, I don't know. Maybe it's because they don't have any opposable thumbs, you wooden shovel. Speaking of those sheep, though, they might be the most aggravating tool the movie uses to drag Woody through the mud, specifically in how they make a huge deal of him not knowing their names they literally never had before this movie.
They have names? You never told me that.
You never asked.
On one hand, it's total nonsense he wouldn't have inquired about their names after all these years, given how deeply he cares about the other toys, or that if he didn't inquire about it, he wouldn't have just naturally overheard her call them by name anyway, or that she would never bring it up to him when she apparently did bring it up to someone she knew for far less time on a far less personal level.
Billy, Goat, and Gruff? Those are my girls.
On the other hand, since apparently it is the case this was the only time you said their names out loud around Woody, then how can you possibly give him shit for not remembering when the one time you told him was the very night you left, which was also the same night RC nearly died in the rainstorm? Though given how completely apathetic she is to Forky's plight, even knowing how crazy Gabby is, I guess it makes sense she wouldn't think the near loss of a friend would be a significant enough event to override the importance of the sheep's names. See, if they'd actually used the prologue to show how much Beau has changed instead of trying to convince you she never did, this could have been another way to demonstrate that character shift, as the whole opening scene was about rescuing a toy in trouble, and now she doesn't care about that at all. But the film isn't interested in highlighting that because they later go on to paint Woody as selfish for wanting to rescue a toy, which, I'm sorry, but you're not allowed to do that when this whole movie is only happening from him acting entirely selflessly from the very beginning. He's completely in the right for wanting to protect Forky and help Bonnie, but the movie thinks he's this horribly misguided little sheep who needs Bo Peep to herd him back to the light. I now refer you back to that lonesome cowboy song from earlier.
You came along, changed my life, fixed what was broken in me.
I really hate that they retcon Woody's lesson of not sitting on the shelf his whole life to be something Beau taught him because she literally didn't teach him that. He learned this in Toy Story 2 completely independently of her. I also hate that this happens like 5 seconds after they broke apart from each other because remember, the writers think Woody is being selfish here.
He only cares about himself.
They wrote this scene specifically to make him come off as selfish.
Nobody wants this.
I do.
So if that's what they believe to be true, then where is Beau pulling the whole
Woody's always trying to do right by his kid
thing from? What made you magically change your mind from here to here? Why were you spending the whole film subtly pushing him away from Bonnie, and why are you still in support of him deciding to betray that loyalty if your stance on the matter is that
Kind of crazy loyalty, just
You gotta love him for it.
this sentence is false? They can't both be true. That's so bizarre. You love his loyalty, but hate him for being loyal, and are thrilled he's chosen not to be loyal despite saying you love him for his loyalty. It's just, I can't, why did you... But the second act breakup scene is just the clearest example of the broader underlying problem. That Beau constantly, aggressively berates Woody with the only justification being, well, he's an idiot for not listening to someone who clearly knows better than him, which I call shenanigans on because Woody is at least on par with, if not in excess of her strategic capabilities given the tremendous feats we've seen him accomplish in prior movies. But Toy Story 4 disagrees and instead thinks Beau's full fully in the right for calling him
My accessory.
blaming him for things going wrong, which we later see she could have easily prevented, constantly bossing him around and impugning his competence through a never-ending train of condescension. It's so frustrating to watch a beloved character get repeatedly put on blast, and I have no idea why Disney thought that wouldn't be the case. It's not even just a matter of this being profoundly unenjoyable to watch. The finale of the film entirely revolves around Woody's relationship with Bo. By the director's own admission, you're supposed to be rooting for him to stay with Bo instead of going back with his friends.
We wanted to make it feel wrong that they're splitting up, so that you want them to stay together.
But when she spends the whole movie treating him like garbage, it becomes really hard to root for the success of that relationship. I already didn't buy their near abandonment when they'd only had positive interactions. I certainly am not gonna buy it now after all that's happened in this movie. Obviously, Bo's not the only reason Woody left, and we'll definitely talk more about that later, but she's absolutely still a huge part of it, and yet all we've ever seen her do in this movie is verbally abuse him, patronize him, and consistently put her needs above his, so no matter how much you quarantine the other toys to convince me otherwise, there's no way I'm believing Woody would choose her over them. They live totally opposite lifestyles. Woody thrived off the cyclical nature of life in Andy's room. We never got the sense he always secretly craved a life of adventure. These acts of heroism were always in service of returning everyone safely to Andy or Bonnie. People often say that opposites attract, and while it's true that these two balancing each other out made them such a great pair, that principle doesn't extend to the point of possessing radically and irreconcilable differences on the fundamental way they view the world and want to live their life.
You were with Bo Peep. That was kind of weird.
Pixar found their success with Toy Story in no small part because they didn't want to do the type of fairy tale love stories Disney had become known for. They told a timeless tale of friendship that showed how valuable those kinds of connections can be, but Toy Story 4 presents Woody's bond with Buzz, Jessie, and everyone else as being totally secondary to that of his love for Bo, which really pisses me off. I take personal umbrage to the message this movie sends that no matter how badly someone treats you, you should always stay with them as long as you still feel that love. I'm sure that's not what the filmmakers intended to communicate here, as they clearly think these two make for a happy couple, but that is still how this comes off when you see how horrible Bo is to Woody from minute 1 all the way to the end. Though it's arguably not the worst message the movie is inadvertently sending. That can be found in the storyline of the film's villain, Gabby, for whom those caveats are rearing their ugly heads once again, because while I do respect the idea of trying to go in a new direction for a Toy Story antagonist, creating someone worthy of redemption by the end, that's just not what they did. They essentially wrote two completely different characters, where in the first half, Gabby is incredibly manipulative, putting up a front of innocence and sweetness to get what she wants from Woody, only to abandon it at the drop of a dime once it becomes clear he actually isn't okay with her harvesting his organs, continuing to pull strings behind the scenes to engineer a situation in which Woody is completely cornered and helpless, but then tried to do a Texas switch midway through, at which point Gabby becomes this tragic, tormented soul who was misunderstood the entire time and wants nothing more than to be loved, and we pretend the entire first half simply never happened at all. I can think of a lot of solid movies that effectively achieve this narrative sleight of hand reversal where you realize you had it all wrong the whole time and the people you thought were the bad guys were actually the good guys, chief among which is the original Toy Story. But the reason why the twist with Sid's toys works is because when you watch the film a second time with the benefit of knowing what's really going on, you realize they never actually did anything to harm Woody and Buzz, and in fact were trying to help them the only way they knew how after losing their voices from all their years with Sid. But rewatching Toy Story 4, knowing Gabby gets redeemed in the end completely kills the script, because you realize, no, your mind wasn't playing tricks on you. She actually was causing significant harm to people people, deliberately taking advantage of someone she knew was only born 2 days prior.
I've known that guy my whole life. 2 days.
And they were just hoping you wouldn't remember that, so you can feel good about her getting with a kid in the end, which does not work. I'm not even saying it's conceptually impossible for Gabby to be redeemed after all her wrongdoings, but the first step to earning that redemption is to actually acknowledge those things as wrong. The only problem with that is the movie thinks she never did anything wrong and instead rewards her for her manipulation, her kidnapping, and her organ harvesting by giving her exactly what she wanted despite never apologizing because she has an emotionally scarring backstory. So it's fine.
Now, after getting to play her for a while, she is misunderstood. She's just aching for love and to fill her toy destiny.
The movie tries to draw this correlation between Woody and Gabby in that they want the same thing, but he's lived a life of privilege while she hasn't, except the critical error they make is leaping from that point to the conclusion of, therefore it's okay for Gabby to harvest his organs. It is textbook emotional manipulation. Literally just, I've had a hard life. You've had a good life. You should help me now because you had your time in the sun. But Woody didn't do anything to you. He didn't cause your suffering. He doesn't owe you anything. You know who else had hard lives? Stinky Pete and Lotso, the former of which does things that are directly analogous to Gabby's actions, but that movie was actually aware that what he was doing was wrong. I don't want to get too sidetracked since I already made a 2-hour love letter for Toy Story 2, but an important distinction between these characters is that prior to his explosive tirade at the very end, the prospector isn't holding a pickaxe to anyone's head. If Woody decided in this moment he wanted to go home to Andy, the prospector wouldn't have been able to stop him. He left the choice entirely in Woody's hands. But Gabby offered Woody no such luxury. She told him she's gonna take him where no one can find him to steal his voice box, and when he understandably hightailed it out of there in fear, she didn't hesitate to order her dummies to seize him.
I just want to talk.
Clearly not! If Gabby really never wanted to harm anyone, then why wouldn't she ask for Woody's permission first before resorting to kidnapping and extortion? Why wouldn't she open with, I never had a chance to be loved. Would you be willing to give me that chance? Instead of, you can't leave, Woody. You have what I need. Right inside there. Is it because she realized how insane it would be to ask Woody to disable himself so she could no longer be disabled? This may come as a stunning revelation to you, Gabby, but you're not the only one with defective organs. I, for instance, needed to have my gallbladder removed when I was a kid as part of the Kasai procedure to fix my broken bile ducts, yet I don't go around kidnapping my friends to steal their gallbladders because that's psychotic. She has this veneer of emotionally connecting with him, but clearly his consent doesn't matter to her, so it's all entirely arbitrary. Whether he bought into her nostalgia-baiting sob story or not, she was just gonna take what she thought she deserved anyway. Also, why would you nostalgia bait me with things I was never shown?
All that time you spent with Andy, riding a bike with him for the first time, comforting him when he skinned his knee.
We have no idea what she's talking about. We never saw this happen to Andy. You could just be making shit up for all I know. Would it really have been that hard to add these moments to the montage from the beginning? Watching this in theaters for the first time was such an uncomfortably dissonant experience because the movie had me wrapped around its finger. I was fully on board with the emotional pacing and shockingly rooting for Woody to sacrifice his voice box for Gabby. But at a certain point, I also realized, shit, I'm falling victim to it just like Woody is. I recognized the exact same type of defensive body language I knew I once conveyed myself gradually being lowered, and I recognized the subtle nuances of his facial animation, a window into that internal war of trying to maintain his resolve while slowly being whittled away at. It's so impossibly perfect and realistic in a way that was both overwhelmingly distressing and also immaculately impressive. I was so blown away by how accurately they depicted this experience and was waiting for the big turn of the card where they held Gabby accountable for what she was doing to Woody, but then they never actually did. What annoys me so much is that from literally every element of filmmaking that isn't writing, this sequence, and by extension the moment when Gabby finally finds happiness with her own kid, is absolutely exquisite. You have the wordless acknowledgement between these toys as they all understand what needs to be done, and just how much of it is accomplished through the animation alone. You have Gabby helping this girl step out of the darkness and back into the carnival, becoming the light of someone else's life after being condemned to that same darkness by Harmony. I cried a lot watching this scene in theaters for the first time, even though I was anti-Gabby not 10 minutes earlier, because what I saw here was a child finding emotional catharsis and comfort in something so seemingly simple when it felt like everything else in her world was falling apart at the seams. And in that sense, Gabby was to this girl what Toy Story was to me. But this only worked for me because I wasn't thinking about what I was watching, because when you do think about it, for even a second, it not only crumbles to pieces, but also ends up becoming something deeply malevolent. Gabby thinks she needs to get her voice box fixed to be loved by a kid. Woody helps her do that, and then the kid only gets the confidence to leave the alley after pulling Gabby's string and hearing a line from her voice box.
I'm Gabby. Will you be my friend?
I'll help you.
Essentially sending the message that the only way in which you can find this love is if you can also find a way to fix your disability, which I don't think you need me to tell you is incredibly insulting. It seemed like the most obvious route Pixar could take this storyline would be that her voice box wasn't going to solve all her problems, and that she would learn by the end she needed to love every part of herself to truly find happiness. But for reasons I don't think I'll ever understand, they decided to go in a completely different direction. Look, if you wanted to have this ending where in spite of all her horrible atrocities, Gabby still gets to live a happy life with a kid, would it not have made infinitely more sense to have a family with a deaf child come into Second Chance Antiques? Someone who wouldn't care that she doesn't have a functioning voice box and just loved having a toy to cuddle with who made her feel safe? Or perhaps even better, someone who would learn that this toy is disabled just like she is, see herself in that toy and go on to love it with her whole entire heart? Someone with whom Gabby would truly be able to bond over an implicit understanding that having a disability doesn't make you any less of a person or any less worthy of love? No? Would that make too much sense? Alright, sure. Fuck me, I guess. I seriously want to love the scene where Gabby gets her kid. If you extract just this section of the movie, it would make for a fantastic Toy Story short film, but with the wider context, you did not at all put in the legwork to earn the same types of payoffs that Toy Story 2 and 3 did. You didn't naturally build up to a bombshell reveal that recontextualizes everything about how a character previously acted. You didn't give us a reason to emotionally connect with her. You're just taking familiar imagery and hoping it'll have the same emotional impact on the audience that it did before. Did I mention the 2-hour love letter I made? Oh, and it also doesn't help that the emotional value of this moment is immediately hamstrung by the stupid RV shenanigans, but let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. There's also the little things that annoy me about her character, like, why would Woody and Gabby's voice boxes be compatible at all? Why do the dummies know how to perform spinal surgery on toys when they don't have the aid of an instruction manual like Lotso did with Buzz? And how are they physically able to do that given their perpetually floppy limbs? Why are the dummies even loyal to her in the first place? We knew why Lotso's henchmen served him so fervently. It was because they directly benefited from him being in power, and we saw how forceful he could be when trying to get his way. But none of that is true for Gabby. The dummies don't benefit from this exchange in any way, and she clearly doesn't care about them because when the toys make their big break from the antique store, she just leaves the dummies behind to suffer in isolation forever. Also, Harmony looking exactly the same as the girl in Gabby's Tea Time book is so obnoxiously on the nose it actually hurts me. By the way, did you know that Harmony's mom is voiced by Patricia Arquette, who's also Harmony Cobell in Severance? You get some someone with that much talent and range and waste her on a character who has 5 lines of dialogue, most of which are just, "Harmony, come here, sweetie."
Harmony, honey, sunscreen. Harmony, sweetie, I'm leaving. Come give me a hug.
That's not unique to her, though. She's just one of many things that are completely and utterly wasted in Toy Story 4, be it thematic concepts such as Forky's existential crisis and Gabby's struggles with her disability, or talented actors playing random NPCs, or characters who may as well be random NPCs.
Get him. Oh, get him.
Bunny, what are you doing? I can't reach him. Help me out here, come on.
Oh, sorry, Ducky, I'm not a mind reader, you know.
What's not to understand?
Listen, I know people really like Ducky and Bunny. They find them to be funny, and these characters do have some truly enriching chemistry with each other. There is no denying that. Getting Key and Peele into the recording booth together to record these lines was nothing short of a stroke of brilliance, and it wouldn't surprise me if the vast majority of their dialogue turned out to be improvised. But I have something of a personal vendetta against these carnival critters for being wholly emblematic of what I hate about this film's attempts at humor. Part of what makes the first movie the funniest one is the fact that it catapults jokes at you at Mach 10 speed. There is almost no downtime between the words and actions, so if one of the jokes doesn't land, that's alright because we're already on to the next one. There's no noticeable lapse in effectiveness from excessive dead air, but as you saw in that clip I just played, that dead air isn't just present in Toy Story 4's comedy, it is Toy Story 4's comedy. The jokes take so unbearably long with lingering in the gaps between the words that if they don't land, which for me, they most certainly do not, you really feel it. Especially in the 2-minute long plush rush that just goes on and on and on, dragged out to death, and they just run whatever humor might have been present the first time they do this directly into the ground. Every last second of this is completely wasted screen time because when they did this to Sid, it actually meant something, but this is all just a daydream that has no impact on the story because the key they're arguing about how to get is literally hand-delivered to them on a silver platter. That's just Ducky and Bunny in a nutshell. They are entirely superfluous to the narrative. They start out the movie with one clear objective.
3 years. 3 years! That's how long we've been hanging up there waiting for a kid!
But what they do in this movie is not in line with what they want. If they want to get with a kid so badly, then why would they bother chasing Buzz all the way across the fairground and on top of the antique store instead of just, like, waiting for a kid to find them at the carnival where families are everywhere? Maybe use the winner-winner chicken dinner strategy we see later since they apparently always have a baseball on hand, ready to be deployed at a moment's notice. Also, they completely forget about the skull by the end of the movie. They don't go back to Bonnie with Woody, even though the only reason we were stuck having to deal with these two idiots for as long as we were was because Woody promised them,
"I'll take you to Bonnie." Who will Bonnie love more, Ducky or me? Say me.
No, say Ducky.
Then again, I can't single out these two for being useless because Giggle McDimples also does basically nothing for the entire story.
What I would just say in one word is she is a boss. I hope that shows girls that they are so powerful no matter how small or shy, and you can go out there and really kick butt.
See, she could have been interesting. She could have some level of principled respect for Buzz since they're both rangers in their own respective fields, and they're the only two characters who ever recognized any level of authority in Woody's badge, but they never explore that. Which is interesting because at one point, she did have an arc. She had a backstory about a police partner who got eaten by the cat, which then made her decision to return to the antique store stronger knowing the traumatic memories associated with this place, and it would have made the moment where she also gets swallowed much more impactful. But just like they did with Bo, they cut this entire storyline from the movie and relegated it to a stupid Disney Plus short. Though, in fairness, I can actually somewhat understand why they might have cut this one, because
I got ground against sharp teeth while being cradled in a slimy yet sandpaper-like tongue. I was slowly digested through the gastrointestinal tract. After 8 days, I got stuck in the beast's colon. And then, I saw a great light. The outside world.
Look, I had to watch this shit, so now you do too. But was concern for the cleanliness of the audience's eyes the actual reason it was cut?
One of the things I missed that we didn't get in there was she used to have a partner. Officer Rib Tickles was the best darn cop Pet Patrol's ever had. He was eaten right before retirement.
It's very upsetting.
Way to beat the odds, soldier.
Oh, is that why? That's it? That was the whole explanation? Okay. I mean, I guess that would also explain why Forky's existentialism wasn't taken remotely seriously, or why assaulting an old grandma was treated as a funny haha instead of the seriously risky and significant event it was at the end of the first movie, or why Duke Kaboom's backstory, which by all accounts should absolutely be handled with extreme care in the same vein as previous characters, is treated as nothing but a joke, which indirectly kinda dumps on those other characters by saying being abandoned by a kid isn't actually all that bad, and it happened so long ago that you really should have gotten over it by now, you whiny little loser baby bitch. You know, you could have used the idea of a toys commercial being misleading as an allegory for how parents or teachers can often place unrealistic expectations on young kids and how that can strain their relationships and their self-confidence in life, or you could have made Duke a defective toy and that's why he couldn't perform as advertised and drawn a connection between him and Gabby. Or I suppose you could just turn this all into a funny haha.
This is for you, Maria.
It's kinda incredible how little staying power this motley crew had. There's a reason why, 7 years later, no Toy Story 4 characters were ever added to the Toy Story Mania ride in Disney World or Disneyland, whereas the Toy Story 3 characters were added before that movie even came out, and in fact, Bo Peep's entire level was gutted to make way for Rex and Trixie's Dino Darts. They never even changed her design to be more in line with Toy Story 4, which they did do for Toy Story 3 by adding Spanish Buzz in addition to the normal Buzz. Oh, what? They don't want to spoil the movies for the theme park guests, which is why Bo's costume was never changed? Yeah, we'll explain this shit then. But perhaps the most severe instance of wasted potential out of all these characters is, surprisingly, Bonnie's parents. Now, much like how I appreciate Toy Story 4 treating Bonnie as her own person the way they did during the kindergarten scene, I also appreciate the idea of expanding the role of the parents in these movies, of actually showing Bonnie's dad and giving him lines instead of having him rake leaves in the background, of fleshing out the bonds they have with their daughter and how they help her process emotions, akin to Riley's family from Inside Out. Except, this doesn't happen. In fact, they don't try to comfort Bonnie at all when she's terrified of going to kindergarten and are basically just like, "Hey nerd, what are you doing under the bed?" Although maybe my disappointment comes less from anything these two specifically did or didn't do, and more from how humans as a whole are treated in this movie. They are not the massive obstacles they once were. They are minor inconveniences who are played with by the toys as part of their game far more than the other way around. For as much as you can question whether the humans from the original trilogy should find some seemingly inexplicable events to be rather strange, Toy Story 4 stretches the suspension of disbelief for that far too much. Obviously, Andy's mom would be baffled as to why Slinky's ass is precariously positioned at the windowsill and probably look outside to see what's going on given there's a biblical thunderstorm happening outside. Obviously, at least one of the children in this classroom or the teacher would notice the magical moving lunchbox or the magical moving cowboy, even if it's just sensing movement nearby. And obviously, this RV stunt, everything about this horrifying, stupendously irresponsible RV stunt is so far beyond the pale for what these toys should realistically be able to get away with, even in a franchise as lighthearted and fantastical as this, that it borders on being a parody. This isn't even bottom of the barrel. We're scraping the sea cucumbers off the bottom of the Mariana Trench with this one. In no universe are you ever going to get me to believe Bonnie's parents have such staggeringly low situational awareness that they don't even bat an eye at a GPS voice that sounds completely different from normal and is coming from a completely different direction and can actually scream at the driver. Nor does Bonnie's dad notice the bright, sparkling unicorn that should absolutely be within his peripheral vision yanking down on the gas pedal, nor does he simply hold down the brake pedal to stop the car dead in its tracks. You're also also not gonna get me to believe Buzz somehow managed to parkour his way on top of the RV while it was moving, which would require him to open at least one window without alerting anyone in the car. And you most certainly are never, ever, in a million years, gonna get me to believe these toys would be willing to endanger not just an entire carnival of children, not just any innocent bystanders in the town, but also Bonnie's family and Bonnie herself, because if they crash the RV from this senseless behavior, they're all dead! Now, none of those problems will come as a surprise to anyone who watched my original series, as I ranted about them extensively, so let me tell you about something else that really bothers me about this whole finale. The first 3 Toy Story movies all had this whimsical nature to their action sequences. For instance, there are no airport luggage conveyor systems like the one from Toy Story 2, nor are there incinerators like the one from Toy Story 3, because it's all in keeping with that sense of childlike imagination. Even when the stakes are through the roof and the tone is the darkest we've ever experienced in the series, it always still felt contained in this little pocket dimension removed from human presence, despite you knowing they have to still be there. There have to be humans driving this dump truck and this bulldozer. There are humans inside that plane, humans driving the cars down the road. Yet they were never drawn attention to for more than maybe a second or 2 at most, because it was always supposed to be this secret magical world of toys coming to life happening underneath the humans' noses. Like this could all theoretically take place in the real world, when you drive down the road, or when you get on a plane and you never be the wiser. There is no way to prove with absolute certainty that your toys don't come to life and aren't having these adventures when not being monitored, which is an epistemological quandary that's strongly enhanced by these action sequences. But Toy Story 4 doesn't have that whimsy really in any aspect of the film. It's always so dour and depressing in its writing and flat out boring in its major set pieces. You know how the first 3 movies always had these grand, action-packed, adrenaline-fueled climaxes that built to one grand euphoric release point? What the hell is this movie doing? Reckless driving and ziplining across the carnival? Oh, what, sorry, is Duke's stunt supposed to be the big moment? Because that's hilarious. It's genuinely impressive how this is simultaneously the dullest payoff of all the Toy Story action climaxes, while also being the most unbelievable, largely due to being the most directly intertwined with the human world in a way that's simply a bridge so far off I consider jumping off it, because of how many people should be around to witness this thing, especially when there's people on the Ferris wheel and there are fireworks going off right now, which you'd think would grab the attention of the people on the ground, yet not a single person gives a damn.
Nav can't tell which way's up out there.
Look, I get it. When we're dealing with a family-oriented animated movie about sentient talking toys, you gotta suspend your disbelief to a certain extent. If we can believe that Buzz is truly a flying toy, Bullseye is as fast as an airplane, and Woody and Buzz can resist the force of an industrial-strength magnet, then we can also believe that Bo was strong and fast enough to pull off this chain of monkey stunt, and it's not particularly insightful or worthwhile to pick apart every minute logistical element of a sequence like this, right down to how many people are sitting on one side of a lunch table or how close the RV is to the edge of the cliff. But there is a point you can reach where you can't suspend your disbelief any further before it snaps altogether. And I don't know for sure exactly where that line is, but I'm pretty sure it's somewhere around toys assuming near total autonomy over a recreational vehicle without any of the humans being wise to their extremely conspicuous shenanigans. Toys driving vehicles isn't even a new thing for these movies, but what is new is doing them with other people inside the vehicle and somehow being able to navigate the RV exactly where they need it to go without being able to actually control the steering wheel, which is the other crucial distinction. I'm not even expecting movies to perfectly align with the rules of reality. Some of the greatest films of all time never would have gotten off the ground if that were the standard being applied. What I do expect, however, is internal consistency. When you walk into any given movie, TV show, video game, or what have you, there is an implicit agreement you make with the creators. You are entering a world that may very well play by completely different rules than that of our own, and the creator is allowed to do that, but also that you, as the audience, expect said creator to remain consistent with the rules they establish and don't flippantly contradict or abandon them on a whim. I expect that if you tell me it's extremely important nobody moves a muscle and everything remains exactly as it was for when Bonnie returns, that you will not immediately nullify that importance 5 seconds later by giving Woody back his badge after Bonnie specifically removed it from his vest to give to Jesse. I expect if you show me in a previous story that smaller combat Carls will have high-pitched voices compared to the full-size models, they will continue to have high-pitched voices in subsequent installments. I expect that if you tell me this is a world where toys can't move when humans are playing with them, that we won't waste time with Gabby practicing her tea time manners when she obviously won't be able to actually utilize any of those skills when Harmony plays with her. I expect pull strings to not suddenly function in a way they never have before, playing multiple voice lines all at once without releasing the string just to attract the cat's attention. I expect that locations with well-established geography won't radically change between movies in ways completely incompatible with stories taking place before and after. I expect if you show me how strenuous it is for Woody and Bo to reach the top of Second Chance Antiques, you won't simply teleport other characters up there, some of whom definitely don't have the athleticism and mobility required to pull off something like that. Speaking of teleportation, I expect that if you tell me an object is in one place, be it a sticky hand or a backpack, it will not magically teleport to a completely different location with no explanation, or even teleport to the first location since you showed me how little time Bonnie was in this store and there's no possible way she could have gotten it all the way over here. I expect if we spend 3 whole movies showing how important it is for toys not to be broken and how dangerous animals can be for toys, that the 4th film wouldn't treat a toy who's been eviscerated from the waist down by a cat as a joke.
Saw your better half at the front of the store.
Yeah, you mess with the cat, you get the claws.
To that end, I also expect you to not pretend as if loosely taping a porcelain arm back together grants the same functionality as stitching a ragdoll arm back on or reattaching a plastic arm into a ball and socket joint designed to be assembled in that manner. I expect when characters are given mission-critical objectives to complete, they won't suddenly disappear from the scene the very instant they're needed the most. I expect that if Buzz can glow in the dark, as we've seen in all prior entries in some form, including the shorts and TV specials, that the same would be true for this one. Like, man, even Fortnite got that right. I also expect in this dark scene that the toys would make some effort to whisper to each other the way they did in previous movies when in close proximity to other humans and also not muffled by any kind of box or backpack instead of just I expect if Woody is established to be concerned about Buzz getting beaten up in the first movie, the same would also be true in the 4th. I expect that given how critical the physical differences between Woody and Buzz were in the first movie, that you wouldn't make the head of an action figure behave like a rag doll, and you wouldn't have that action figure lose a test of strength against a floppy ventriloquist dummy, nor would you make Woody be able to yeet a trash bin out the back of the RV without anyone noticing after going to great lengths to establish how limited the toy's strength is in previous films. I also expect that if, in that first movie, falling from the top of the stairs was enough to break Buzz's arm off, then Buzz catapulting himself across a carnival at top speed and promptly crashing into a spinny ride might be at least a little more destructive than a couple of soft bonk sound effects. Oh, but what about when he fell from the magnet in Toy Story 3? You mean when he fell into the soft cushion of shredded garbage? And last, but certainly not least, I expect If the entire point of this mission here is to rescue Forky, at least one of you turkeys would think to actually grab him before making your grand escape, especially the ones who aren't doing anything else at the moment all the chaos is unfolding, and especially since he's lying motionless on the ground directly next to your cat conga line where any of you could easily reach him, except, oh wait, no, he isn't actually, because he just magically teleports to the other side of the room. Likely an attempt at a duct tape solution from whoever at Pixar noticed this glaring problem. Now, are all of those things earth-shatteringly significant contradictions? No, not at all. My point here is not to argue Toy Story 4 is bad because they forgot Buzz can glow in the dark, but instead to showcase what I believe to be death by 1,000 cuts. I place a lot of value in these things because my emotional investment in a story is very often contingent on the logical coherence of its script. Every once in a while, a movie comes along that drifts so far into the realm of absurdity, it wraps back around to being a work of genius, but more often than not, when enough breaches in the consistency of a script stack up, they start to prevent me from fully immersing myself into the universe and seriously engaging with the story being told, because if you are unable to establish and maintain a consistent set of rules for your world, it's hard for me to become fully invested in that world when I know just about anything could happen, particularly when dealing with the things that aren't ultimately insignificant in the grand scheme of things, as they directly impact how the story unfolds. Nowhere is Toy Story 4's lack of sensible plotting more apparent than in the quest to rescue Forky from Gabby. It's highly unlikely that the average viewer would notice a lot of the things I just mentioned in that rapid-fire soliloquy on a casual viewing, and even if they do, I imagine they'd probably shrug a lot of them off since that list was largely comprised of either blink and you miss it details, or things that can't be gleaned from cursory observations. But that is not the case for the entirety of this antique store heist, which comprises a disturbingly high percentage of the film's runtime, and all of it is a colossal waste because none of it is even remotely necessary. Look to the Sunnyside prison break sequence from Toy Story 3 as a point of comparison, as while it is obviously quite tonally and contextually distinct from what Toy Story 4 is going for, it still serves the same narrative function of needing to help toys escape from a heavily guarded fortress, but the key difference is that movie actually put in the work to earn such a complicated sequence. To give you the Cliff Notes version, since I have a whole other 6-hour-long video talking about how amazing Toy Story 3 is, what makes that movie so impressive is how they managed to take one of the most wholesome, innocent, colorful locations imaginable and turn it into a horrifyingly dangerous nightmare of a prison. It felt like everywhere you tried to walk in Sunnyside once prison mode was activated was an immediate death sentence, constantly being surveilled by cameras, patrol units, or spotlights, and sometimes all of them at once. And they spent the whole movie slowly pulling back the curtain on how all the mechanics worked here, ensuring the audience fully understood what was going on so there could be genuine tension when things inevitably went wrong in the plan. There's a clear series of obstacles the toys have to circumvent in order to escape, and each phase of their plan is not only perfectly in sync with each toy's unique abilities, but is also absolutely essential because they've cemented into your minds how any other possible avenue of escape will inevitably lead to some kind of dead end, meaning the stakes couldn't possibly be higher than they are here. This is the one and only chance they have of escape. It's an all or nothing, winner-take-all battle between Lotso's seemingly indomitable stronghold and Woody's brilliant strategic thinking. They didn't just say, "In order to cross the chasm of charlatans, you must first solve my riddles 3, even though there was a grappling hook right over there you could have used instead, which is essentially what we see play out in Toy Story 4. They introduced so many new elements and characters to facilitate this rescue operation, but it's all needlessly convoluted. I'm not even talking about hyper-specific nitpicks like, oh, these guys teleported here. How does nobody notice any of these shenanigans? Why did Woody aim for the cat instead of the spork? Why is he just sitting around doing nothing for so long? No. None of that. From a big picture perspective, everyone on both sides of this battle are acting in ways that are actively counterintuitive for what they are trying to accomplish. On the villain side, Gabby has lookouts stationed on the cabinet, but also plans for Woody to bypass those lookouts to rescue Forky so she can more easily corner him, so what's the point in bothering with any of the dummy aisle shenanigans? It's wasted effort that only serves to heighten your risk of getting caught by humans for no reason. On the hero side, the conflict of Gabby holding the sheep hostage is entirely arbitrary when Bo can literally resolve it by saying 2 words to them, and they claim Duke is required for getting across the aisle when that very obviously is not true.
Everybody knows the best route is behind the shelves.
That would have been a better route, wouldn't it?
The heroes put so much effort into staying under the radar and out of sight of the dummies, but your routing doesn't matter when the end objective is to leap across the aisle right in front of where the dummies are looking anyway, which is just about the least subtle thing they could possibly do to reach the cabinet. They spend an excruciatingly long conversation calling Woody an idiot for wandering into the aisle, even though all this gobbledygook ends up getting Woody to the exact place he already reached 10 minutes earlier by simply wandering into the aisle. And the only reason this doesn't work is because Bo didn't tell him about the key they need to unlock the cabinet, which it turns out, despite claiming otherwise, she doesn't actually have a plan for how she's going to retrieve it.
What about the others?
Giggle knows what to do.
Meanwhile,
We have to get that key.
How are we supposed to do that?
Duke would honestly be better served just distracting the cat, who clearly cannot catch up to him, but even getting him for that purpose would be a lot of time wasted because it's a goddamn cat! Do you know how easily cats are distracted? Do you know about the most stereotypical tool often used in movies and real life to hold a cat's attention? Do you know what one of the main characters of this movie has unlimited access to? Yet even with such an easy solution nobody ever takes advantage of, the cat is still way more of a threat than any of Gabby's ventriloquist dummy guards, which... The problem is kinda in the name, don't you think? It was bad news if you ever encountered one of Lotso's henchmen, but with how effortlessly the dummies can be dispatched, I struggle to understand why I should ever be afraid of them. This could have worked really well if they leaned more into the horror aesthetic, and that was where the tension came from, but like I said earlier, they drop that almost as soon as it's introduced, and they're only ever used as minions to chase the heroes through the antique store, despite not being built to handle those types of scenarios, so they're obviously going to be trounced by Bo Peep, especially since they're too stupid to realize she can mop the floor with them and so leave her entirely unattended tunnel visioning Woody instead. The main overarching problem here is that in spite of how serious the situation is and how time sensitive this plan is, everyone acts so casual about it and you never feel those stakes the way you did in Toy Story 3, where they had to get out of Sunnyside that night or else they'd miss Andy leaving for college the next morning, and with how many nail-biting close calls there were, it really seemed like every move they made could be their last. Now, it could be argued that toys don't need to be super efficient with their rescue operations, since Jesse's aforementioned tire stunt bought them, as it turns out, an entire day because Bonnie's dad's brain runs on dial-up and he shouldn't even be trusted with basic shapes and colors, but they don't know that. They have no idea what's going on out there. As far as they're concerned, the family could leave at any moment because remember, at this point they've yet to realize Bonnie's backpack is in the antique store. They don't believe anything is tying her to this carnival, so I do not understand why everybody is acting as if time isn't of the essence here. Even beyond the logistics, I just find the antique store to be such a repetitive element of the narrative because we keep going in and then out, and then back in, then back out, then back in and back out over and over again, and it's so tiresome. But hey, this place is home to a joke that's beloved even amongst people who hate Toy Story 4.
How do we get that key?
Yeah. People really like that. They think it's hilarious. And I understand why. In isolation, the way it's staged, the music build-up, the timing of the key drop, the choice to specifically only animate the toys' eyes while otherwise keeping them stationary, the way it's all framed makes for a really strong comedic punchline after all the intense debate over how they were gonna get this thing. I might even laugh at it myself, if it were the only instance, or at least one of very few instances of contrivance in Toy Story 4. The same can be said for any of the numerous contrivances throughout the film. If it was just the astronomical coincidence of Bonnie's family making a pit stop at the exact place Bo Peep wound up after all these years, including Woody directly bumping into Bo at the playground, even including the fact that all of this is happening the day before the carnival is set to leave, thus creating a ticking clock. You want to manufacture a love story between these characters? Whatever. I can accept that the same way I can accept the convoluted chain of events that allows the toys to end up on the curb in Toy Story 3 before sending themselves to Sunnyside. But then it just keeps going. They never try to provide a reason for why things are happening. It's always just, how is Woody gonna get away from Gabby when it's 4 o'clock in the morning and he's all alone at this antique? Well, you see, it's actually 8 o'clock in the morning now, so the shop's open for business. Not only that, but the first customer of the day happens to be the girl who Gabby's whole solar system revolves around, thus pulling her attention away from Woody long enough for him to escape. Let me be crystal clear about something to really drive this point home. While my original Toy Story 4 analysis was obviously extremely hyperbolic in a lot of ways, I am not exaggerating at all when I say right here and right now that literally every single scene in this movie is linked together by the most contrived events possible. Characters will constantly either trip into each other, into the next set piece, or into whatever miraculous solution will allow them to escape their current predicament. So when I look at this key delivery, I don't see a standout joke. I see yet another instance of lazy writing. And when enough of these contrivances happen, the story devolves into just being a sequence of events unfolding one after another with no sense of cause and effect stringing them all together, which is such a boring and unsatisfying way to tell a story. To put it simply, it's "and then this happened" instead of "because that happened, this happened." It's virtually impossible to avoid having some degree of convenience in your script, just as we all experience lucky and unlucky events in our day-to-day lives, but my god, please try not to have your entire script be contingent upon that as a writing device. Boy, it sure was lucky there was a spork in the trash can on the first day of kindergarten when no one's even had lunch yet. Sure was lucky Forky got stuck in the ground and Woody bumped into him so soon even though they kept driving for quite a bit after he first flew out the window. Sure was lucky the bus rolled up to the playground when it did so we could get Woody and Bo back together. Sure is lucky there's a perfect row of bouncy devices leading directly from the carousel to the antique store. Sure is lucky there was a random nail on the grass under the family RV, that there was a ramp leading directly to the only missing pane of glass on the window, that there was a security guard wandering right in front of this little girl. I truly don't know if you can get any lazier as a writer than to have a character's voice box literally tell them to look out at the exact microsecond his friends are jumping over his head so he knows where he needs to go next. That or
your backpack's at the antique store. Let's go!
Oh no, my backpack!
What a hoot! Oh, one more time!
Your backpack's at the antique store. Let's go!
Oh no, my backpack!
If Toy Story 4 had been released in the current year of 2026, this would be one of those moments so impossibly idiotic it leads many moviegoers to call into question whether it was written by AI, because surely no human would ever think this was a remotely competent way to move the story along. But we should all take solace in the fact that, even ignoring the release year, there's no way this could have been written by a machine, because generative AI doesn't have a single creative bone anywhere in its source code. It is a mere simulacrum of the creative experience. A robotic child playing dress-up, mashing together all it can ascertain about the human-made works from which it steals and then shitting out the mangled result onto a piece of paper, resulting in the most uninspired content in the universe. No, my friends, only a human being could ever devise a plot beat so monolithically, biblically, catastrophically, preposterously fucking stupid! You just got done complaining about how loud and annoying Buzz was, struggling to figure out how to turn him off, you're very clearly aware of and put off by the things he is saying, and yet, miraculously, the unmistakably distinct tone of his voice, the slight hesitation before he speaks, surely even a different feel in your hands for how the sound waves reverberate given his words echo throughout the the cabinet, or even just the simple fact that this space ranger is talking about backpacks in antique stores at the exact moment it turns out Bonnie left her backpack in an antique store, giving specific instructions to your daughter, none of it raises a single eyebrow in this RV. It's incredible. It's absolutely phenomenal. How do you write like this? Well, the answer is that you don't. You just give up. Plain and simple. They said, fuck it. Just have him tell Bonnie to go pick up her backpack. This is a film about talking toys intended for children. Who cares? Whatever grace you can grant the rest of this movie regarding the human's general unawareness of toy activity flies right out the window as soon as this happens, which is exactly what Bonnie's mom should have done with Buzz as soon as she realized this toy was trying to talk to her daughter. I mean, they clearly try to play this off as a joke to lampshade it because they know how unthinkably implausible it is, but the thing is, some people don't see it as a joke. Some people actually think this is part of Buzz's character arc. And crazy though that may sound, I do believe that the intention here was to provide him with a genuine opportunity to grow as a character. The idea that Buzz begins the movie lacking the confidence to really think for himself, instead relying on his voice box to make decisions for him, but then by the end he reaches his defining moment where he learns to trust his actual inner voice.
The concept of the inner voice for Buzz becomes a device for trusting yourself.
Bro, if this is Buzz trusting his inner voice and thinking for himself, then just lobotomize him. Why not make him manipulate his voice box the same way Woody did in the first movie? It would not only be consistent with the rules established within this universe, but also would more explicitly tie into that arc by having Buzz literally take control of his inner voice to make a decision for himself. In case it wasn't clear, though, I'm putting historically large quotation marks around the word arc, because to describe Buzz's over-reliance on pushing the buttons on his chest to do literally anything as a character arc is to provide a level of charitability even Charlie Morningstar would struggle to conjure up. It all sounds great on paper. The only problem is that we're talking about Buzz Lightyear here, a character who in the first movie was so outspoken and confident in himself, his abilities, and his opinions that it drove another man to nearly kill him. A character who, in the second movie, was able to stand firm against that same man and drill into his head the very morals Woody once instilled in him. A character who, in the third movie, was able to calmly and confidently lead Andy's toys even in Woody's absence when the stakes were more dire than ever before. Under no circumstances should a character who's done all of these things require an arc about gaining the confidence needed to make his own decisions, which should be readily apparent to anyone who just watched Buzz's journey throughout the original trilogy. Honestly, though, I almost don't even need to outline any of that stuff. Patient zero for all of this nonsense was Buzz getting stun-locked by Woody telling him what a conscience is, leading him to believe he's referring to his literal inner voice box. Again, we are talking about Buzz Lightyear here, a character who believed he was a real space ranger, going on real heroic missions, fighting real evil villains. His whole thing is helping people. He's been doing it since the moment we first met him. How could he possibly not understand what a conscience is? Even if you want to steelman this by saying, oh, well, I mean, I'm sure he knows about the concept of inner morality, he just probably doesn't know how to describe it, you know? In what universe do you think it makes sense for someone to understand the concept of depression, to know what medical school is, to have an appreciation for people's cultures, to accept his own mortality, to know what crystallic fusion is, which is something Lightyear tells us apparently stumped Star Command's top scientists for 62 years and could only be cracked by a therapy cat, for him to be intimately familiar with all that, but to not know what a conscience is. Oh, but have you considered that in 1999, a space ranger called a s'more a schmo?
They're called s'mores, Buzz.
Right, of course.
In the nearly 5 years it's been since I first released my Toy Story 4 series, I think I can confidently say that by this point, I have read and heard just about every possible defense available on the internet for why Buzz is written this way and why it isn't an assassination of his character. And I'm sorry, but I remain completely unconvinced by every single one of them. So let's run through the list. First, Buzz was never a smart character. He thought he was a real space ranger in the first movie, remember? It's an argument as old as time, but there is a critical difference between being stupid and being ignorant. It's silly for Woody and the audience to watch Buzz try to repair a cardboard spaceship or fear for his life when his plastic helmet opens, but with what Buzz understands to be the case, he's behaving as intelligently as one could reasonably be expected to in trying to keep both himself and Woody alive, both before and after realizing he's a toy. Oh, but you know.
So he thought Andy's room was a planet? I mean, how is that not annoying?
Thank you.
Very cool how the writers have made it canon that Woody has apparently still been harboring some frustration toward how Buzz behaved in the first movie, even after all they went through together. Hope it was worth it for the joke, guys. Anyway, even if you think this is a game of semantics and he was still stupid in the first movie by your definition, that's just the first movie. You know, the beginning of his character's journey. He doesn't act stupid in any way throughout the entirety of Toy Story 2 and Toy Story 3, and is in fact shown to be quite the opposite, with several critical deductions being made with critically small amounts of information, several innovative solutions to difficult problems devised in an impressively short amount of time, and doing these things while also acting as the leader of an entire family of toys when the overwhelming obstacles in their way put an enormous amount of pressure on him to maintain a cool, collected head so they can always look to him in moments of crisis for cerebral guidance, emotional reassurance, and acrobatic prowess, and even when he does revert to his demo mode personality, he still maintains that sharp wit. And that's not even factoring in the things he does in the shorts and TV specials. So I simply do not accept that it's anything other than a senselessly stupid decision to take a remarkably perceptive, inventive, resourceful, generally intelligent character and turn him into a walking spatula for Toy Story 4.
There's nothing better than Buzz on your side when you gotta get stuff done.
The fact that his delusions from the first movie are so often used as justification for this inner voice nonsense,
And Buzz is not always the brightest crayon in the box.
tells me the people who made this fundamentally did not understand who Buzz was or why people found him so funny. It wasn't because we were laughing at him thinking he himself was the joke. We were laughing at the absurdity of the situation and that there was a toy who so earnestly believed he really was a legendary, heroic space ranger. But if you look at the movie from a rudimentary, surface-level perspective, then yeah, I can see how you'd come to that conclusion, and that's exactly how we get a movie like this where Buzz's stupidity is the entirety of his comedic contributions to the story.
How embarrassing.
Second, Buzz was always supposed to be comedic relief, while Woody was the actual main character of the series, so I don't see why it's such a big deal for him to also serve that role in Toy Story 4. The thing is, his storyline in previous movies was able to make you laugh while also having him do all those things I just outlined, so I don't see why we needed to make Buzz act like a blithering idiot to do that in this one. Woody being the protagonist doesn't give you an excuse to make other toys act completely out of character. Third, Buzz doesn't know what s'mores are or how to say Hawaii, so of course he wouldn't know what a conscience is, and given Buzz only understands how the world works because of Woody, of course he would place invaluable trust in his word when teaching him about new concepts. Okay. Let's say I buy that he has no idea what an inner voice is and needs Woody to explain it to him. Even if that were true, it does not logically follow he would extrapolate Woody's description to mean his literal voice box, which he should know full well is just a toy part, nor does it justify his complete lack of faith in his own capabilities, rendering him unable to do anything without pressing his buttons, and it most certainly does not justify him deciding to test this little crackpot theory in the RV when there are other humans nearby who could and should hear him when he plays his extremely loud voice lines, given how concerned they are about his voice box later in the movie. Fourth, Buzz was crushed by a TV at the end of the third movie, so I think it's reasonable for him to be a little slower than usual after sustaining such significant brain damage. This would actually be a strong defense for why Buzz is acting so out of sorts, Were it not for the fact that the end of Toy Story 3 and all subsequent shorts and TV specials completely disprove this notion, as he's not only shown to be mentally and physically capable of engaging in the same types of activities he always could before, he's also shown to be emotionally capable of interacting with and reassuring other people and making the types of moral judgments one only could if they had some kind of conscience advising them. Not to mention that if these were actually the rules the universe was playing by, you'd think there'd be some kind of throwaway line from the characters acknowledging this possibility. Like, man, Buzz really hasn't ever been the same ever since he took a TV to the cranium. You'd also think if blunt force trauma was capable of meaningfully altering a toy's IQ level, that Woody might have also been acting with far less conviction and competence after this happened. Fifth, Buzz isn't actually dumb in Toy Story 4, he's just using ChatGPT to help generate ideas he's just pushing his buttons to help come up with ideas, so really, it's not as bad as other people who use this environmentally destructive art thief. The problem is that Buzz previously didn't need to rely on his buttons to get things done, but now he is repeatedly shown to be completely and utterly helpless without them, because that is what will inevitably happen when you repeatedly relinquish your autonomy and outsource your critical thinking skills to a machine. You know what? Actually, I take it all back. Toy Story 4 was a genius allegory for how AI is gradually making everyone dumber to the point where they can't even write a fucking email without it. A prophetic masterpiece whose brilliance we were simply too naive to see. Sixth, yeah, Buzz is kinda dumbed down in Toy Story 4, but it's not that much different from when Buzz got reset to demo mode in Toy Story 3. Now, I am sympathetic to people who dislike this aspect of Toy Story 3 because it is very unfortunate that our Buzz is absent for roughly a third of the runtime. However, when he is present, he is capable, he is headstrong, and he is consistent with his beliefs from beginning to end, in all three personalities he adopts throughout the film, which is not the case for Toy Story 4, where he freezes like a deer in the headlights when people look to him for guidance, which he didn't do in either Toy Story 2 or 3. He relies on his buttons to tell him to do things he previously didn't need any additional nudging to get done, but then also allows it to tell him to do things he absolutely would not do under any circumstances, like letting Woody charge straight into the lion's den by himself before retreating back to the RV. Don't even get me started on how the writers are forced to invent a bunch of new voice lines we've never heard before and are obnoxiously specific to Buzz's current situation on every single occasion, especially when it comes time to be as on the nose as possible about how he needs to
Return to base. We're going home, Space Ranger. Retreat. There's two. Go. Time to fly. Exit the get back. Run. Get out.
only for them to stop being relevant right at the exact moment he needs them most. Maybe the smoking gun for Buzz's defense team has still eluded me after all these years. If you think Buzz's character is consistently written in Toy Story 4 and you didn't see your defense for it pop up in this section, feel free to leave it in the comments below. Perhaps I have simply yet to be enlightened. But as is, I remain firmly committed to the position that Buzz's treatment in this movie is among the worst instances of character assassination I've ever seen in media. Not to say there aren't some decent moments worth highlighting. The nighttime heart-to-heart in the RV is actually pretty good until a very specific moment when you realize he forgot to pack his brain with him on this road trip, at which point he becomes completely unbearable to listen to. Buzz makes one single decision by himself during the big rescue scene where he uses his wings to disarm the dummies. Buzz gets to assume something of a leadership role in the third act. You know, there's traces of who he used to be. And the weird part is that it kind of feels like Pixar really does think they've written him in line with all the previous movies. Like, you and I look at this alley scene where Buzz abandons Woody and think, what in the world? Who wrote this nonsense? Obviously Buzz would never ever do that. Whereas I think Pixar is looking at this scene and going, well, it's just like Toy Story 3. Woody's made his choice and I may not like it, but I guess I can't stop him. They probably think this is consistent for Buzz's character, but Woody wasn't in danger when he chose to leave Sunnyside, as this was long before the reveal of Lotso's dark side. Here, however, Woody is willingly walking into a danger zone that nearly got all of them killed not 2 minutes earlier, in which they all collectively decided not to return to specifically because of how dangerous it is.
Woody once risked his life to save me. I couldn't call myself his friend if I weren't willing to do the same.
these two characters would go to infinity and beyond for each other. Buzz has never hesitated in the face of danger before when he knew his best friend's life was on the line, so the fact that he does here, let alone the fact that he does because he relinquished his agency to the stupid buttons on his chest, is infuriating on an elemental level even the world's smartest therapy cat couldn't verbalize. Does Buzz even know what the stakes are here? Does he realize Woody's about to lose his voice box if he goes back in there and he just doesn't care? Did he not see what the dummies were trying to do to him? Or did Woody not tell him anything about what was going on with Gabby when he regaled the long story that led them to this position? Speaking of voice boxes, if you are so insistent on this actually being a really meaningful character arc for Buzz, then why wasn't this the moment when he reaches the climax of that journey and finally decides to ignore what his buttons are saying and trust what his gut is clearly telling him to do, that being to go help Woody instead of this?
Your backpack's at the antique store. Let's go!
Then again, that's generously assuming Pixar actually thinks they're writing a character arc here and not just using Buzz's voice box shenanigans as a joke for—
So Buzz here, this is continuing the joke of his inner voice.
Right. Goodbye, Steelman. I tried my best. Hey, at least we got the carnival scene, right? We get to hear Buzz's theme from Toy Story 2 while he flies over the carnival.
Oh man, this theme right here, Randy wrote in, it's a callback to the Toy Story 2 opening where Buzz is being amazing. And this is just to see Buzz be awesome.
It's a pretty bold move to try to cross a carnival in the middle of the day, but if anybody can pull that off, it's Buzz Lightyear.
What? But he doesn't cross the carnival. If you wanted to let him be awesome, then why didn't you just act—
Well, actually, it turns out nobody can pull it off.
That's
Even
true.
Buzz gets
doesn't work out so well.
I don't— why do I bother? He honestly may as well not even be in the film with how little he contributes, and when he does contribute, he's—
Your backpack's the antique store.
Woody may be the main character, but he always shared the stage equally with Buzz Lightyear. Their relationship has been the heart and soul of the franchise since day one.
Buzz and Woody relationship has really been the core of the Toy Story movies.
Removing either one of them from the equation is like having SpongeBob without Patrick, Shrek without Donkey, Marty without Doc, Harvey Specter without Mike Ross, Timon without Pumbaa, Mario without Luigi. Oh wait. Of course, getting put on the back burner isn't a problem unique to Buzz in this movie. The entire rest of the original cast, including both Andy and Bonnie's toys, are completely shafted, and you'd be forgiven for forgetting they even exist at all. And just like Buzz, whenever the other toys do get something more substantive to do, they're— Do you love how Jessie's grand contribution to the story is to pop a tire with a nail she found lying on the ground somewhere, but then also forgetting to do that same thing again later when it would have been extremely helpful? Do you love how a full year has passed between Toy Story 3 and 4, and yet all the toys are acting like this is the first time Bonnie's mom has ever cleaned the bedroom and put all the toys away in the closet? As if the vast majority of their lives aren't spent in enclosed dark spaces, and as if they weren't abandoned in a toy box for far longer yet still didn't act this irrationally feverish? Seriously, why do we need Dolly and Woody to give everyone a pep talk before playtime? They've been here a year! Broadly speaking, the other toys' main role in Toy Story 4 is to repeat the "we gotta stop Bonnie's family from leaving the carnival" bit again and again, and believe me when I say this got real old after just the first round of listening to it. It also got old watching these idiots be completely apathetic to keeping Forky safe, as not a single one of them understands what Woody's saying when he explains how important this thing is to Bonnie's happiness. See, Toy Story 3 had an excuse for the other toys not to believe Woody when he insists that Andy didn't mean to throw them away because from their perspective, with the limited information they had access to, there's really no conclusion they could have possibly come to other than Andy tried to throw us away. And with how fervently devoted to Andy Woody always has been, it can make him something of an unreliable narrator in this situation. Refer to my love letter for more details details on that. But in Toy Story 4, they have access to all the information. They should know how important Forky is to her because they can see it. They're all stuck in this stupid sardine can together. They're constantly being manhandled as she frantically searches for the spork every 10 seconds, and yet none of them put the pieces together until it's too late. You also don't get any notable moments or lines for any of the toys because they're always addressed as a mass collective rather than a group of individual characters. It reminds me of the final season of Stranger Things, where by that point the cast had become so comically bloated that every other dialogue scene was just one long expositional paragraph arbitrarily chopped up between a bunch of different people with no regard for anybody's personal experiences or opinions or what it would make sense for a specific character to say in any given situation. It's the exact same thing here. People will sometimes defend this element of Toy Story 4 by saying, well, you can't expect the whole cast to get something meaningful to do, but that exact thing was one of the strongest aspects of the third film. That in spite of having less than 2 hours to work with and an enormous roster of toys to shuffle around, if you were to remove any single one of them from the story, the causal chain of events would immediately break because they all get at least one major chance to shine, be it in conversation or in huge action set pieces, and you never lose track of anyone on the cast despite them all sharing the same space for nearly the entire runtime. No one voice gets lost in the shuffle. No one body gets forgotten when things really start hitting the fan. Their movements and beliefs are all easily trackable from frame 1 all the way until the credits. Every line of dialogue made sense for each character. It felt like we were watching a family full of unique perspectives and personalities rather than a hive mind of perpetual confusion and panic. But why do you want them to have a bigger role? Their arcs were all completed in Toy Story 3. Yes, true. It's almost as if continuing the franchise past the third movie was a colossal mistake because the story was already over. But characters don't stop being valuable if they no longer have any room to meaningfully grow. How do you think Pixar managed to make such amazing short films even though by this point everyone's emotional journeys had come to a close? How do you think Buzz managed to become such a popular and beloved character even though the only movie where he really has a proper arc is the first one? Also, the entire conceit of Toy Story 4 is pretending that actually this wasn't supposed to be the ending of the series, even though it very clearly was.
But it also needs to be a climax for the trilogy, and so
we really thought we were ending it. We thought that was it. This is the end.
And now this is the big final adventure for the toys we've been following since 1995. If that's what you want to do, then the other toys should absolutely be along for the ride. But hey, it was all worth it so we could get the big celebrities in the recording booth, am I right?
Ha! Ha ha! Yes! Yes! No.
Listen, I love Keanu Reeves, I love Key and Peele. You were in the Owl House for a couple episodes. I especially adore Jordan Peele's movies and find them intensely fascinating to think about and discuss with others, but I can experience these people's work elsewhere. I came to Toy Story to watch an adventure with the characters I've been attached to for my entire life, not to watch them all get steamrolled in favor of shoving more big-name celebrities in my face until right at the very end when the story hard pivots to extracting all its emotional value out of the classic characters and their connection to Woody, all of whom immediately accept this radical change to the status quo despite not being present for any of the development leading up to it and not being given any choice in the matter. I've never really thought about this before, but do you realize how insanely surreal Toy Story 4 is from the perspective of all these other toys? They do bugger all for 90% of the movie, don't see Woody again at any point once he leaves the RV, and don't even know he's reunited with Bo Peep after all this time. Then when they finally see them both again at the end, Woody goes, "Later, bitches!" And everyone's okay with this? No one has any questions, no one's even remotely surprised, they're just like, yeah, I guess we're doing this now. Jessie and Bullseye especially don't give a damn, even though the latter was the only toy who consistently refused to abandon his cowboy even when he was acting against his interests, and the former Yeah, that's her brother, man! From her perspective, because remember, she didn't go on the journey with Bo, this is arguably the most offensive thing Woody could possibly do to her because he's taking for granted the very family she was overjoyed to finally find in Toy Story 2 after years of abandonment. She's already gone through Woody's exact journey of having a kid who was her whole world and then joining a new family in which she found new purpose. With all these two characters have been through together, I'm not accepting the idea that she'd be this willing to accept Woody's departure. She should smack him across the face for being so selfish and then yeet him back down into that RV herself. Remember what I said about Toy Story 3 juggling the toys so evenly? The biggest benefit of doing this is that in the final incinerator sequence, when they finally reach the end of the line and everything that's been weighing on them the entire movie engulfs their minds like the fiery pits of hell threatening to swallow them whole, and they all join hands to face their end together with dignity as a family, doing whatever they can to comfort each other. It all hits you as hard as it does because you've experienced this life-changing adventure right alongside everyone together. But with Toy Story 4, there's an inherent disconnect between the characters the bulk of the adventure is centered around and the characters the final 5 minutes are focusing on. This isn't the squad you commit to for an entire movie if your ultimate objective is to create an emotional goodbye scene for the original squad. It just makes this whole thing seem so very bizarre. Though, to be fair, I do kinda understand why this decision was made. See, as I alluded to earlier, the filmmakers wanted to
make it feel wrong that they're splitting up, so that you want them to stay together.
They found themselves in this unenviably precarious position where the emotional finale is banking entirely on the audience's connection to these characters, while at the same time realizing they can't give said characters any meaningful screen time in this movie, because if they do that, it'll be an even more impossible task to convince audiences it's a good thing that Woody is leaving. But that task suddenly becomes extremely easy when you don't actually spend any time with 90% of the other toys and just quarantine them all in an RV for the whole film, because by the time you reach this scene, audiences will have mostly forgotten about them, so they'll be more willing to let them go in favor of Bo and the amazing plush carnival crew! There's an unavoidable insinuation here that Woody's relationship with his friends is less valuable than his relationship with his kid, because we're supposed to believe that after he leaves them behind, he won't suffer a debilitating mental decline without his lifelong family, despite being so hung up about Andy he Freudian slipped his way into giving up a vital organ to a crazy psychopath. Seriously, how awkward is it for this family to share a final heartfelt goodbye when Woody's only leaving because apparently being with that family just ain't enough for him? The crazy thing is, I'm technically committing the exact same sin the movie did. I'm only referring to these toys as a mass collective instead of discussing what the decision to sideline them does to each individual toy. For instance, do you guys remember the peas in a pod? Yeah, well, they got deleted between movies, right alongside Chuckles and Totoro. At least Totoro's absence can be explained by a loss of licensing rights. There wasn't much the writers could do about that, but the other two don't get an excuse. Chuckles was taken out back and shot in the head right when he finally started to feel happy again, an ear-to-ear smile growing on his face at the end of Toy Story 3 for the first time in years. And the strange thing about the peas is that they actually do show up during one of the Forky Asks a Question shorts, which makes Toy Story 4 somewhat embarrassing, since there are several shots where all of Bonnie's toys are allegedly supposed to be present. Though, to be fair, I'm unsure as to the canonicity of these things, because where the fuck did Mr. Spell come from? In any case, their absence from this movie also harms Mr. Potato Head's character. Remember how his rescue of the aliens and their eventual acceptance into his family were all part of his redemption arc for how horribly he treated everyone in the first movie? Growing from a snarky, vindictive loner to a still admittedly sardonic but also more caring fatherly figure, and how that even carried carried over to the peas in Toy Story 3's epilogue? Yeah? Well, now the peas are absent, Bonnie leaves the aliens behind in the room when going on the road trip, and neither of these things are ever brought up by any of the characters, not even the potato heads. I know some of this can't be helped given the unfortunate deaths of both Don Rickles and Bud Lucky between films, but that shouldn't stop Pixar from simply recasting them so the characters can live on. You did that with Slinky. In fact, you did it so well, most people didn't even realize he was recast. You did it with Wheezy for all supplementary Toy Story media released after Toy Story 2, and now you're doing it again with the potato heads for Toy Story 5. So why did you just execute Chuckles? Remember when toys disappearing between movies was a massive event worthy of conversation and wasn't just thoughtlessly glossed over in the hopes that nobody would notice? Also, while I respect the intent behind exclusively using archival recordings to craft Potato Head's performance, that decision completely screwed you guys over, because it is totally implausible the most abrasive character from the original trilogy by a mile would be fading into the background the way he does in Toy Story 4. Dare I say the way Potato Head is handled in this movie is akin to how Leia was handled in The Rise of Skywalker, where the actor's performance is so obviously duct taped together from archived footage, and every time they speak it sticks out like a flamingo in a flock of pigeons. I acknowledge I can never truly compartmentalize the meta-knowledge I have regarding the film's production, but I feel like it would be abundantly clear to anyone that something is wrong here, given how literally every single one of his 11 lines, yes, I counted, is some variant of a generic reaction line.
Where's my ear? I knew it. No, have.
Bo, are we going?
Oh, no. Oh, how could this Hey, watch it, buddy. Hey, you gotta be kidding. Go.
Even putting all that aside, losing 2 actors shouldn't mean the entire group has to suffer as a result. The epilogue of Toy Story 3 set up a bunch of new character dynamics that would be ripe for exploration in Toy Story 4. We got the nerdy dinosaurs, the wiser and smart alecky cynics, the parents and their newly adopted kids, the 2 leaders, the fussy British thespian, and a squad of aliens finally given the chance to put their voices to good use after being silenced for nearly their entire lives. They set up all these threads and then proceeded to do absolutely nothing new with any of them. And in fact, they actually take things away, like how they turned Dolly from being a kind-hearted but firm leader into a total jackass out of nowhere.
Woody, can't you see I'm threatening everyone? Go back to the closet.
Yeah, I know.
Speaking of being a leader, the film really bones itself here because we're supposed to accept that by the end, Jessie goes on to become the new leader of Bonnie's Toys. But even though we know from watching the other movies, and especially the Halloween special, that she would be more than capable of stepping up to the plate in Woody's absence, this movie didn't at all earn this conclusion because she was barely in it, and her 2 big standout moments relied on impossibility, contrivance, or both, not to mention reckless endangerment. Also, despite that final RV stunt all being Jessie's idea, Buzz is still somehow the one in charge of everything as she cowers under one of the seats. As much as I despise how little Buzz got to do in Toy Story 4, Jessie was treated even worse, and if the whole point of this movie is for Woody to pass the sheriff's badge on to Jessie, then shouldn't you want to show her actually being a leader to justify that decision? You know, I don't think I fully expressed earlier how much I loathe Jessie getting the shortest possible end of the stick, and to make matters worse, it doesn't even make sense for Woody to be the one passing on the badge, because despite all of Bonnie's toys constantly turning to Buzz for help in times of crisis, Dolly is supposed to be the one who's actually in charge, but she has no reaction to her position being usurped. All of it is a complete mess. Why did you do this to her? Why does she only have 8 more lines than Mr. Potato Head does? What if, when Jessie first goes to pop the tire, she meets resistance from Dolly as she's supposed to be the one making the calls and feels offended that someone else is seemingly trying to take her place? But then, as Jessie routinely steps up to take charge in situations where Dolly is clearly way out of her depth since Jessie's experienced far more adventures than Dolly could ever dream to, she starts coming around to the idea that perhaps Jessie is better suited to lead Bonnie's toys, giving her some kind of arc and a reason for her to exhibit this more curt personality. Now, obviously, to make this work, we need to completely nuke the RV storyline and start again from scratch since, as written, there isn't enough screen time for this hypothetical subplot to feel earned, but the basic idea here is to give these characters something more individually substantive to make them more than just a swarm intelligence, and to give them some level of relevance to the overarching story. Oh, but they get the RV stunt! They all work together to save the day in the end. They kinda don't, actually. It's only two of Bonnie's toys and Mrs. Potato Head that do anything to help here apart from Buzz. Also, I don't know if we want to be gunning for this scene as an example of characters getting stuff to do, because for reasons previously discussed, this is arguably the most eye-wideningly horrific part of the film. I mean, the only other thing that could possibly give it a run for its money is... Alright, folks. I guess it's finally time we return to the scene that broke me back in 2019. The scene that was single-handedly responsible for my original series being made, in which Woody decides to abandon his friends and his kid in favor of exploring the world with Bo Peep and living life as a lost toy. This moment is the crux of the entire film and is therefore often solely responsible for determining whether people love or hate Toy Story 4 as a whole. If you're in the former camp, you see this as a masterful deconstruction of the themes explored throughout the original trilogy that brings Woody's character arc full circle, properly closing the loop on the Toy Story saga. If you're in the latter camp, you see this as a complete and utter betrayal of absolutely everything that had been built up since 1995. When walking out of the theater in 2019 and when making my 6-hour-long Venom canon in 2021, I was quite firmly in the latter. I was utterly dumbfounded at what I was watching on the screen and legitimately could not believe they'd so deftly demolished decades worth of development and essentially flushed any ounce of meaning one could extrapolate from the series directly down the toilet. But is that still the case now, in 2026? Well, there are certainly a lot more layers to this discussion that are worth exploring, but in order to properly talk about the ending sequence, we first need to rewind all the way back to the beginning of the movie and see how we got here. Because all the balls ultimately roll back to one very simple plot beat Toy Story 4 establishes out of the gate. Bonnie's not playing with Woody anymore.
Okay, bye toys.
That is the linchpin of Woody's entire character journey in this film. How he reacts to the notion of not being her favorite toy, or not being played with, or being left in the closet, that's all stuff we can talk about in a little bit, but I'm still stuck all the way back on how Bonnie's portrayed in this movie. It never really made sense to me why so many people were willing to take it at face value that Bonnie so flippantly ignores Woody throughout almost the entire movie, but as I've been exposed to more and more of the discussion surrounding this topic, I've come to understand where the breach in communication comes from. The vast majority of Toy Story fans only watch the theatrically released movies. They either are unaware of, or otherwise simply don't care about all the various shorts and TV specials I reference so frequently, which bridge the gap between Toy Story 3 and 4. So for those people, their only exposure to Bonnie is through the collective 10 minutes of screen time she got in the third movie, not having anything else to go on beyond, she's the girl Andy gave away his toys to. And from that perspective, it of course makes sense that a little girl would naturally develop different passions as she grows up, which could eventually lead to Woody feeling unfulfilled in her care if she loses interest in him. Whereas I come at this film from the perspective of someone who voraciously devoured any and all Toy Story content he could get his hands on across all different mediums, which did of course include these shorts, so feeling like I'd come to know Bonnie a lot better in the interim, arguably even more so than I ever did with Andy, seeing her act so blasé about
My cowboy.
was as jarring as it was aggravating. I know that she's a 5-year-old kid, which makes it extremely realistic for her to change her mind about literally anything at any given moment, but children have never been portrayed in a strictly realistic manner in the Toy Story movies. It's often stated that in the original film, Sid is a more accurate representation of how a lot of real kids play with their toys, with Andy being the oddball for putting down a pillow so they don't get hurt, because a lot of children don't have the same reverence for their toys that he does. But for the purpose of the story Pixar wanted to tell, they created a world where the relationship between a toy and their kid is, or at least very often can be, a sacred one, which then makes it extremely confusing that they magically decided to make Bonnie act like a real toddler for the first time while simultaneously writing a story where absolutely everything else is infinitely less realistic than it ever was before. Besides, we're not talking about how real kids would or wouldn't act, we're talking about narratives, storytelling, natural progression. You can't have an ending where Bonnie promises to take care of Woody knowing how much he meant to Andy, and then have the next movie completely walk that back because the director decided to go in a different direction, one so different, in fact, it resulted in throwing out 75% of the original script for Toy Story 4. You may think it's silly to assess the character consistency of a kindergartner, but Bonnie was clearly written to serve two radically different purposes in each of her movies despite still being the same person, and I don't think that should be ignored just because she's a kid. Bonnie was more than just the recipient of the proverbial torch in Toy Story 3. She was a deeply shy and private kid who also had boundless amounts of imagination and energy she only felt comfortable unleashing within the walls of a place she felt protected and secure. She may be timid around other people and slow to make friends, but it's clear that deep down inside she carries a strong sense of consideration and empathy as seen in how she treats her toys, rescuing the broken and abandoned ones she finds at Sunnyside such as Chuckles and Woody, bringing them home to her sanctuary, and valuing them all equally, treating her brand new cowboy with the same level of passionate affection as her seasoned veterans, and welcoming her old toys into the playtime just as warmly as she does the new kid on the block. The film went to such great lengths to portray Bonnie as generously as they do because it's essential that you believe this will be a happy final destination for the toys to arrive at. Andy is only willing to relinquish Woody, after much deliberation mind you, because he sees himself in how she treats her toys and believes her when she promises to take care of Woody for him. Only for us to arrive at Toy Story 4 where we discover Bonnie apparently cares so little about Woody she doesn't even notice when he abandons her, which is messy at best. And even if you do want to appeal to reality with how 5-year-olds act, they may change their minds on a second-by-second basis, but they are also more than capable of recognizing when someone is emphasizing the importance of something, particularly if it's a gift given directly to them. I have distinct memories of my 5th Christmas where I was given a board game called Uncle Wiggly as a present, shout out to anyone who remembers this thing, which my mom told me she would always play with my grandfather when she was a kid, and on that basis alone I would always want to play it because I could tell it really meant something to her. So I'm sorry, Pixar, but I frankly don't believe you when you tell me that within the span of a year, Bonnie would go on to be this cavalier about the most prized possession of her family's longtime friends that was passed down to her. If you did an exit poll for the audiences of 2010 on what they thought Woody's life was going to look like with Bonnie, there's no way anyone would have told you he was going to end up all sad and miserable and abandoned, because that's not something Toy Story 3 ever establishes or even implies might be the case for how Bonnie treats him moving forward. And there's certainly no way anyone would have told argue that one day her whole world would revolve exclusively around one toy and one toy only, as even though her other toys are still present and accounted for, she literally never plays with any of them except the one toy which, according to all known laws of aviation, she absolutely should not be playing with at the same time and with the same passion as her new favorite thing ever, which totally doesn't make this whole story seem so very, very, very bizarre. Like, she at least cared enough about Woody to bring him along for the family road trip, which is a privilege that several of Bonnie's original toys were not afforded, but the Spork certainly was.
Forky!
Genuinely, the frequency with which Bonnie screams for Forky becomes like nails on a chalkboard at a certain point. She didn't act like this in Toy Story 3. Even when she was about to lose what she believed to be her toy, she was noticeably upset, but not in a pouty or grating way. She believably acted like a 4-year-old, but also managed to be very sweet and endearing at the same time, which I cannot say about her in Toy Story 4. And if you watch these movies back to back in one sitting, as I had the distinct displeasure of doing very recently, it becomes even more staggeringly confusing. Now, of course, the reason why they've done all this is because, much like most general audience members, this creative team never really saw Bonnie as her own character with traits or opinions or desires. They saw her as a means through which to facilitate the arcs of other characters, and specifically making Woody not seem completely heartless for abandoning her in the end, which kinda undercuts the praise I had for the kindergarten scene treating Bonnie like her own person. But sure, Bonnie doesn't care about Woody anymore. Even accepting that, the fundamental question at the root of all this is, was Woody truly character assassinated by Toy Story 4? Well, let me start out by saying he is certainly a far cry from the worst cases I've seen of characters being horribly mistreated, where from page 1 she's already completely betrayed everything she spent the last decade of her life fighting tooth and nail to achieve for absolutely no reason at all. Yes, I'm still mad about these shitty comics. They're so fucking bad I wouldn't even use them as toilet paper. Or cases where the character is otherwise completely unrecognizable from how they were before, and although there could be a reality in which it makes sense, we either weren't provided with any of that buildup, or when we finally get it, it's astoundingly unsatisfying. Or cases where no matter what the buildup may be, it's just abysmally unwatchable dogshit, which is particularly prevalent for legacy sequels. Woody doesn't fall into any of these categories. While his age may be a core part of the story, he isn't treated like a bitter old man or an incompetent buffoon. They do still stumble sometimes, like when he's acting all emotionally constipated talking to Buzz in the closet, or when he's stubbornly committed to doing everything himself in spite of learning in Toy Story 3 that they were better when they worked together, or when he turns into a wet napkin the instant Bo Peep strolls onto the screen.
That's awful.
Great, huh?
I mean, awfully great that you are lost out here.
Ceasing to be proactive and merely allowing himself to be carted around from scene to scene by Bo, not to mention the name shenanigans from earlier.
Sorry, guys.
Girls.
Girls, of course.
It's also a little embarrassing to have Woody completely ignore his mission to return Forky to Bonnie when for all he knows, the lamp he saw in the window may not even belong to his Bo, and given he doesn't exactly have a great track record with entering mysterious new buildings, maybe just drop Forky off with Bonnie and then go back to investigate? Or maybe ask who else would want to see Bo again after all this time?
Buzz! My old moving buddy!
Wait, but you weren't actually moving buddies though. But for a decent chunk of the movie, Woody acts exactly how you'd expect him to, and there's a lot of stuff I genuinely love about how he's written here. I mentioned this towards the beginning of the video, but given that was over 2 hours ago, I think it bears repeating that I adore everything about him in the kindergarten scene. Woody leaping into that backpack to be there for Bonnie, even if she didn't explicitly want him because he saw how terrified and upset she was, is great. That's my guy right there. That's the cowboy I knew from the original trilogy who'd do anything to be there for his kid when they need him. And it's nice that he's presented throughout the entire prologue as being an equal to Bo, not lesser than her, still being shown as a quick thinker in hazardous situations. Then there's little things like Woody wanting Forky to tell Buzz he needs to get the RV to the merry-go-round. Just the idea of him placing so much trust in Buzz's capabilities that no matter how completely impossible something seems, Woody wholeheartedly believes he'll be able to figure it out, even when literally everything else about this film is actively bleeding out on the table. Woody's characterization remains nearly unscathed for the vast majority of the runtime, barring a few scratches here and there, and for that reason, I can't consider his writing in Toy Story 4 to be a totally indefensible desecration, especially not compared to Buzz, who from minute one already has a broken brain and a broken moral compass, whereas it's really only in the final minutes of the movie when questions start popping up for whether or not Woody is acting in character. So, was he? Is it within Woody's character for him to leave Bonnie and his friends behind? Was that a good narrative choice for Toy Story 4 to make? Well, I might be about to blow your mind here, but at its core, I truly, deeply appreciate what the film is communicating here. If you're a parent who sent your kids off to college, wondering what you're supposed to do with your life now that you've accomplished such a monumental task, if you're someone who's searching for a new purpose after experiencing a major climactic event, such as a graduation, wondering how to keep pressing on when it felt like everything had already wrapped up so neatly, or even just someone who's generally feeling unfulfilled with their current lot in life, stuck in a box they don't feel they belong in, looking for something to help them find that spark again, then I can very easily understand why this movie would resonate with you so deeply and why you'd be willing to come to the defense of Toy Story 4 on that basis. Initially, I didn't. Not even slightly. Obviously. But in the fullness of time, I've come to develop a deep appreciation for the broad strokes of what they were going for with Woody's journey, of exploring who Woody is after he's no longer with Andy when he's literally had his name inscribed on his boot for as long as he can remember, having become so fully enveloped in his kid's happiness he literally does not recall where he comes from or what his life was like before Andy. Because even if it were true that Bonnie still loved Woody deeply, he was never going to find another kid that meant as much to him as Andy did. He would never have the same role in Bonnie's life that he did with Andy when he'd practically been there since Andy was born. It almost acts as a role reversal from the first movie, where now Woody's the one searching for a new life purpose, believing he doesn't have anything motivating him anymore, forfeiting his voice box to Gabby because that's the one part of him that's primarily valuable to the kids who play with him, rather than something representative of who Woody is as an individual. The idea that there is value to be derived from not being loved by a kid, and that if you're lost, you don't immediately become useless junk, is one worth tackling in a Toy Story movie, because there's a whole other world out there to explore regarding what life is like for the less fortunate toys beyond the scope of the specific group focused on in the original trilogy. And you can extrapolate merit from that in the real world, with people who are constantly pressured by their friends, family, or general societal expectations to have kids of their own, even if that's something they simply don't want to do, and who may end up feeling worthless because they didn't achieve the conventionally accepted end goal of life. The theme of looking for a new purpose is something I find to be extremely touching and thoughtful. But here come those caveats I keep talking about, because just like Gabby's big scene, it's only heartfelt if you don't think about it for more than a second. Because given all the development Woody has experienced, it is totally inconceivable for him to be feeling this directionless and having the drastic thoughts that he does. In fact, this ending runs so directly contrary to the specific lessons he learned in each individual film, it almost has to be deliberate. Woody overcame his insecurities about not always being the favorite toy?
No.
It really bothers him that he doesn't have a big role in Bonnie's life. Woody decided it was better to be with a kid for a finite amount of time than it was to have an immortal life away from a kid?
No again.
Who needs a kid's room? You can have all of this.
Woody went for an entire decade without being played with by Andy, but remained true to his belief. That didn't mean he no longer cared for him, and was ultimately validated for that belief by the end?
No.
Woody just sits in the closet with no playtime?
Yeah, he told me himself. He's useless.
Hey, weren't you right next to him when he got played with?
When it all ends, I'll have old Buzz Lightyear to keep me company. For infinity and beyond.
No.
The thing that makes Woody special is he'll never give up on you, ever. He'll be there for you, no matter what.
No. Somewhere in that pat of stuffing is a toy who taught me that life's only worth living if you're being loved by a kid. And I traveled all this way to rescue that toy because I believed him.
That last clip is prominently featured in nearly every single Toy Story 4 critique available on YouTube, but for good reason. It's the mission statement of the entire franchise. So you're gonna need to work a lot harder to upheave that loyalty than they did with this movie. The whole
That's the third time you haven't been picked this week.
thing is so incredibly sloppy, because if they wanted this to show how frequently Woody isn't being played with as justification for his departure, old-timers should have said, how many weeks has it been since you got played with? Or how many months? Or at least not a number as small as 3 goddamn days. Ever since his journey in the first movie, it didn't matter to Woody how big of a role he had to play. Just being a part of his kid's imaginative playtime, being a part of this family, that was what mattered to him. You even see some of that in this movie. Bonnie doesn't realize she's holding on to Woody when she falls asleep, but clearly it's still providing her with a sense of comfort, and you can see in his face that this brings him happiness. Why would you show me this if you were just gonna have him abandon her at the end anyway? It's such an astonishingly bizarre narrative choice. What makes you think he's in any way justified to leave her behind without her permission when, although going to Bonnie was his idea, he only left Andy after he gave his permission, and were it not for Woody tagging along at kindergarten orientation, Bonnie would have been inconsolable. His services were still very much needed and appreciated. He had a kid. He was being played with. He had a family. He had everything he ever wanted. Woody and Gabby bond over their agreements that the most noble thing a toy can do is to be there for their kid, only for him to swiftly abandon that principle for his own kid. That's just so stratospherically, unconscionably, toweringly fucking bizarre! And making this out to be a happy ending for Woody's character carries with it a lot of unfavorable implications. For instance, by framing this as Woody finally getting to do something for himself, as many often do, it implies that Woody never actually wanted to be with his kid and was just doing what he thought he needed to feel worthwhile, when, for one thing, that's not even true, because he's still doing this for the sake of other kids and toys so he can feel like he's still worthwhile, and for another, that clearly was never the case in the original trilogy. This wasn't a one-way street. He got as much joy out of being played with as Andy did by playing with him. Even though being with his family and making memories for his kid is all he's ever wanted to do for 3 movies straight, this movie makes a big deal about how life with a kid is one of eternal subservience and zero autonomy.
One of the big things about the story is she has agency. She decides what she wants to do, where she wants to go, what kids to play with. She's not simply carried around by her kid and not really have any control over her life.
See? Woody will finally have agency now that he's a lost toy! Which is preposterous because he never just blindly followed what other people wanted for his life. Toy Story 3 literally ends with Woody engineering a situation that wasn't what Andy originally intended, trying to push him to make a different choice more in line with what Woody believed to be a better outcome, and what we ultimately saw was a better outcome.
You are going to be there for Andy when he
Who's Andy? I mean, Bonnie. You have to be there for Bonnie. That is your job.
He says this with such vicious vitriol in his voice, like he resents his undying obligation to his kid, because that's what the movie needs you to believe is true for his departure from that kid to be seen in a positive light.
Why?
Because it's all I have left to do.
I don't have anything else.
Yeah, buddy, you don't have a kid to look after. You don't have any friends whom you almost burned alive with together. Don't you remember the Chris Stapleton song?
I was a lonesome cowboy. I didn't have a friend.
That's the real reason Buzz wasn't glowing in the dark earlier. Not because they forgot he could do it, but because they needed to keep Woody in the dark all the time to show how lonely and miserable his life was without Bo, who literally lights up his world when he bumps into her lamp again because she's the only character who ever mattered in his life, I guess. The idea that
This is going to be a tough transition for him.
was some bullshit concocted specifically for this film because we saw in Toy Story 3's epilogue that the toys still maintains their familial bond and we're all thrilled to be at Bonnie's house. Yet Toy Story 4 is insistent that Woody just cannot let go of Andy, and in extremely overt ways.
He had this other kid, Andy. And you know what? I don't think he's ever gotten over it.
The whole story is contingent upon that being true, as if he didn't already have a whole defining character moment in Toy Story 3 where he did, in fact, move on from Andy finding a new purpose with Bonnie, and where they didn't need to have a spork explicitly exposit that to me.
Your purpose fulfilled?
Exactly.
They make it seem like Andy just unexpectedly passed Woody on to Bonnie, and though Andy might have been ready to let go, Woody secretly wasn't, because he had no clue this was about to happen, even though this whole thing was his idea. Andy was the one who wasn't sure about the whole thing. Do you guys remember when he instinctively pulled back as Bonnie reached for Woody? Well, actually, I guess you wouldn't remember that if you hadn't watched Toy Story 3 in 9 years, because Toy Story 4 deliberately removes the nuance of that moment from the nostalgia montage. How curious. You can't just change your mind and tell me Woody is being ignored and feeling useless while not making the same argument for Buzz, who is also shown sitting on a boat doing nothing during playtime and in fact is actually never played with by Bonnie, nor are any of Andy's other toys. They're only manhandled, and you certainly can't do that while simultaneously showing Woody being played with and having Bonnie write her name on his boot, which she hadn't done prior to this movie, while also showing me she didn't do the same thing for Jessie, who you want me to believe was actually Bonnie's favorite toy prior to the creation of Forky, something which was true both in the movie and on the real-world merchandise. There were 3 major lessons Woody learned throughout the trilogy, all of which were set up by the very first staff meeting.
Hey, listen, no one's getting replaced. It doesn't matter how much we're played with. What matters is that we're here for Andy when he needs us. That's what we're made for, right?
His fears of getting replaced, no longer being played with, and arriving at the day when he realizes Andy doesn't need him anymore were all checked off. We hit all the marks. Signed, sealed, delivered, it's done. But now they've grafted this new thing onto the end about Woody helping forge new connections between toys and kids, and living with Bo as a lost toy, which is the very thing he's been mortified of since the very beginning. One of my favorite aspects of the original trilogy is how clean and easily trackable Woody's character arc is across the 3 movies, and how satisfying it is to watch how rabidly obsessive he was over sticking by Andy at all costs, and the pitiful levels of euphoria he reaches when he sees him again at Pizza Planet, and then ending the trilogy now finally being willing to let go of Andy and instead go wherever he knows he's needed most. We already had that arc. We had that ending. Everything was beautiful. Woody's story was completed and there was nowhere left for him to go, but because they were so insistent on changing his character to justify another film, they felt the only thing they could do was walk back all 3 of those lessons and take him in a totally different direction. You can't look at the full quadrilogy and see a clean through line from one film to the next like you can with the trilogy. There's a reason why it's often the case, not always, mind you, but a lot of the time, the people who love this movie are the same ones who to put it lightly, don't think very highly of Toy Story 3, and it's because that movie, more so than either of the first two, is directly at odds with Toy Story 4. One says you can still find fulfillment in your chosen field even when your development plateaus. Another says, actually no you can't, but you can find it if you look somewhere completely different. Toy Story 3's credits song was all about how we belong together, while Toy Story 4's big closer is all about how lonely Woody was with everyone else before Bo came along, a song that was originally intended to play during the opening montage to set the stage for what Woody's new life looked like, and was only changed because they realized it would be more effective to throw some easy nostalgia in there. Toy Story 3 gives the series a wonderfully full circle conclusion that bookends the franchise, ties up all remaining loose ends, and made people all around the world sob uncontrollably in such a way that even the mere notion of continuing the story with another theatrical sequel would be one of sacrilege and heresy. So the only way Toy Story 4 can work is to open by saying, yeah, that happy ending you thought you got? Wasn't actually so happy after all, now was it? We gotta give these characters a real ending. That's the whole point of Woody's speech to Forky on the road, explaining how Toy Story 3's ending was actually very lame and depressing, and he wasn't happy finding a new home for his family, and we need to correct this with a better finale, but how is it not infinitely more depressing to separate from your friends for what we at the time thought would be forever because they obviously didn't have these giant walkie-talkies with them, despite previously believing you were better together?
I'm gonna miss the two of them together.
I would like to once again reiterate what I said all the way back at the start of the video, which is that the people who made this movie do not secretly hate the Toy Story series. What I actually think happened here is they saw Toy Story 3 and said, I mean, it's a fun movie and all, but I personally would have gone in a different direction with the toys after Andy grew up. Rather than Woody finding a home with another kid, I'd have him abandon kids altogether and find a new purpose somewhere in the great beyond, and thus Toy Story 4 was born, ordaining that Woody must be miserable in this new life to line up with what the filmmakers believed would be the case even when it never actually was. This movie isn't interested in telling a story that naturally continues from where these characters left off. It's interested in sending a message about purpose by any means necessary. The characters are mere pawns on a chessboard helping actualize that objective rather than being the centerpiece of the narrative the way they always were before. Hence why Buzz tells Woody,
Bonnie, we'll be okay.
You believed life was only worth living if you're being loved by a kid. You have no way of knowing Bonnie will be okay without him. As is often pointed out, children very frequently change their minds on what they do or don't like, so if she once cared for him deeply, she could easily do so again tomorrow for all you know. Now, kids lose toys every day. Yeah, but you can't say that when the entire film is spent trying to retrieve a toy that leaves Bonnie so utterly distraught each time she loses him. The only reason anybody thinks Bonnie could be okay after they leave this carnival is because of things Woody did for her in this movie.
Buzz now has to stand on his own 2 feet.
Tim, what the fuck are you talking about? Did you watch the other movies? Then there's all the other toys climbing on top of the RV, even though there's literally no reason to, because the whole point of all these Grand Theft Auto shenanigans was to get Woody back into the RV with all the other toys, not the other way around. No reason, of course, apart from them having read the script beforehand, thus knowing it was time for everyone to have an emotional goodbye, because that's what you do in a Toy Story movie, right?
Finding the ending of a movie is extremely hard, especially Toy Story film where you want it to be really impactful and really emotional.
I know how bitter and harsh that sounds, but I just cannot shake the feeling that this whole ending sequence is nothing but a cynical attempt to recapture the emotional experience provided by the ending of Toy Story 3. You wanna know why I can't shake that feeling? Because last year, while playing video games in my spare time and looking for something to listen to in the background, I stumbled into a podcast all about the editing process of Toy Story 4, featuring lead editor Axel Geddes. Knowing I eventually wanted to make this Final Reckoning video, I figured it'd be worthwhile to do a bit of extra research into the film's production and see what new insight I could glean. What I did not expect upon hitting that play button was to be bombarded with explicit confirmation of just about everything I'd ever suspected to be true about how this ending turned out the way that it did, yet on a scale so much worse than I ever thought possible.
Well, we were recording with Tom Hanks like in December of 18. I remember we were going back and forth and rewriting and retrying and tweaking all the lines. He looked up at us and said, guys, I don't think we're there yet. Because it was supposed to be our last session with him. He said, why don't you book another hour with me in the new year after you've like figured out exactly what you need here. We rewrote the entire third act about 6 months before release. We had one version of the ending, and at the same time we were prepping a B version of the ending. Like the story team was like going, maybe we should do this, you know? And then when we came out of the audience preview, we realized the version we had in there wasn't quite working. And we lost our story department by then. Like we only had a couple people, so we used kind of whatever storyboards we had from previous versions, and then sometimes we cut it together as a radio play with descriptions of like, this happens, this happens, this happens, this happens, and then ship that to layout. And then we cut it all. We were using a lot of temp music from Toy Story films. You know, Randy, we'd already recorded a bunch of stuff with Randy, but we hadn't recorded that scene yet. But we used some music from some of the Toy Story films there. It was really, we actually did it pretty fast. It was a pretty great moment of pride for me when we showed it to Randy, and he said, the temp's pretty good here.
It's pretty clear what happened here. They decided this ending wasn't emotional enough for a Toy Story movie and that it didn't evolve Woody's character, even though it would have made perfect sense for Bonnie's character, and it would have sent a significantly more positive message had Bonnie chosen to love Woody in spite of his disability, and so they swiveled away 6 months before release and scrambled to come up with something they felt would push things a step further past Toy Story 3.
I think this is the only way you can go another step past Toy Story 3.
I mean, it doesn't exactly take a rocket scientist to figure out this obviously wasn't what was originally intended for the finale. They literally showed the alternate ending storyboards as bonus features on the Blu-ray. But I had no idea about the sheer magnitude of last-second slapdash restructuring that took place behind the scenes, that they literally didn't even have a story department on board when they made the decision to pivot on the film's ending. It's driven me crazy for the last 7 years why in the holiest of dancing cows they decided to shove the triumphant music from Toy Story 3's incinerator scene into the bittersweet ending of Toy Story 4, but now we finally know why. It was the result of a temp score stapled together in a matter of minutes out of older Toy Story music that they clearly never bothered to change. And all of a sudden, all those other nibbling things that felt so bizarre throughout the film started making perfect sense to me. Bo's moment of fondly remembering her time with Molly, Woody seeing the damage Bo has sustained as a result of her fragility and screaming in horror, Bo explicitly stating that she loves Woody for the loyalty he shows toward his kid, the fact that we didn't spend nearly enough time with the other toys, not even Buzz for a farewell ending to work, Bonnie playing with Woody at all, and him finding a sense of happiness saddling up next to her while she sleeps, and Woody hammering home how the most noble thing a toy can do is to be there for a kid. Everything falls so neatly into place with all this additional context. Bo was originally supposed to find happiness with another kid. They didn't think Woody was gonna have a goodbye scene with the original group of toys. Woody originally would continue finding that sense of happiness with Bonnie. She would keep playing with him. He would reject this lifestyle he's obviously not keen to adopt anytime soon, and it wouldn't be the most awkward thing in the world for Bo to talk about how Woody's always trying to do right by his kid, and that kind of crazy loyalty, you gotta love him for it. For Woody to talk about what a toy's most noble task is 5 minutes before he leaves Bonnie behind. That, I think, is the main reason why when I first watched Toy Story 4 in 2019, I was fully on board with the film until we got to this scene, because it genuinely feels like they had 90% of one movie in the can for years and then awkwardly trimmed out 10% of a totally different movie and stapled it onto the end of this one. None of this connects. It doesn't flow logically. We're missing so many critical pieces of information that would allow this to work, and in fact, we were provided with several things that are actively working against this ending.
Because I had a tough time, well, we both had a tough time saying goodbye to Infinity. And we talked to each other, and I said, I had a real tough time. I always felt that this needed Yeah, they gave me the hug, where I hugged him. But you see who initiated the hug in the movie, I hug you. But they didn't give me...
This is the first thing Tim does. Is he know what you should do in this movie, you guys? You should have Buzz do this, and Buzz should do that.
And they don't listen. They go like this.
Buzz
Okay.
But if I can be kind for a moment, ignoring how detached this final scene is from the rest of the movie and how detached the rest of the movie is from the wider franchise, if we just look at the final 10% of the movie, I can honestly say it is a phenomenally effective piece of storytelling, and for general audiences who either don't remember the original trilogy that well or just aren't that passionate about the franchise, I can see why this would have gone over really well with them. That sounds like a backhanded compliment, but I promise it's not. There is genuinely so much to appreciate about the way this final scene is constructed. I appreciate that the decision Woody makes isn't spelled out for the audience. Nearly all of the story in this final sequence is told exclusively through looks the characters give each other, with so many nuances in the emotions conveyed through their faces as we pan across the crowd of toys Woody's saying farewell to, or in the close-up moments with the ones he's formed the deepest bonds with. Bo's extra heavy breathing as she realizes Woody's made the choice to stay with her. The background carnival lights mirroring the effect given off by Bo's lamp to communicate that feeling of safety and peace. Paralleling the shot from the beginning of the movie when Woody has his hands on the box and doesn't want to let go. And there is actually one thing about this scene that does connect to the original movies in a really beautiful way, though perhaps unintentionally, as Buzz implicitly promising to take care of Bonnie for Woody reminds me of what Woody said to Buzz at the end of the first movie as he was dangling from the truck, making him promise to take care of Andy for him. But by far my favorite thing about this ending sequence actually has to do with the way the movie opened. We begin with a light on the left side of the screen that's largely drowned out by a horrific thunderstorm, but we close out with a light source on the right side of the screen without any adverse weather conditions to signify Woody's development over the course of the film, moving from a lonesome cowboy trapped in a dark and stormy place to one who's never felt more confident about his place in the world. Again though, those goddamn caveats. By making this such an explicit parallel, it makes it seem like Woody's choice not to leave Andy in the beginning was one that left him feeling deeply regretful, but now, after his adventure through the carnival and Second Chance Antiques and the playground, he finally has the opportunity to correct his mistakes. That's the whole reason this movie exists, a second chance to correct things after Toy Story 3 destroyed Wait, was that the whole reason the antique store is called Second Chance Antiques? Theoretically, Toy Story 4 could have been a perfect capstone for the franchise because of the sheer amount of references there are. And I don't mean egregiously transparent nostalgia bait, I mean purposeful callbacks attempting to bind the entire quadrilogy together. The logo wipe, Toy Story opening on a morning sky with Toy Story 4 ending on a night sky, a similar plot of a toy flying out the window, arguably due to Woody's own negligence, serving as a parallel to show how far he's come, as now he's fighting tooth and nail to keep Bonnie's new favorite toy from throwing himself away, as opposed to actively trying to get Buzz out of Andy's life and jumping out the window after Forky rather than cowering away and focusing only on preserving his reputation, going back to a Dynaco gas station, a member of law enforcement being impressed by Woody's sheriff's badge and him ultimately relinquishing that badge, signifying the end of his time as part of the Toy Story series. Turning a throwaway line from Potato Head into a setup for a payoff in this movie where Woody actually does get his voice box pulled out. The idea of Woody reaching a point in his development where, though he was once mortified at the thought of becoming a lost toy, he now fully embraces the idea, and then, of course, bringing the first piece of music we heard when Woody came on screen back around for his grand finale. Had the movie actually treated these characters with any level of respect, those would have all been really neat details to talk about. But instead, they come across as nothing but a try-hard effort to milk your nostalgia for all it's worth, just like all the other member berries. Buzz and Woody saying,
"To infinity and beyond,"
is such cheap, manipulative bullshit because it's being used to convey the exact opposite of what that phrase is actually supposed to mean, but it sure is an easy way to pull on those heartstrings when it's referencing exponentially better films. Toy Story 3 gave us an adventure that was truly larger than life from the opening minutes all the way to the credits. It threw the toys into their most threatening conflict yet, culminating in a climax that pushed them to their absolute limits, and then a finale that was the culmination of all the emotional crescendos they had gradually built up throughout 3 movies and 15 years. There is no way Pixar could have possibly topped that in any potential sequel they might have made, and to even try would be a fool's gambit. Yet that's exactly what they did, and the result is the Toy Story 4 we know today, which, in fairness, was always doomed to feel incredibly underwhelming, but there's a difference between a film that's merely unnecessary and kinda underwhelming, and a film that actively betrays nearly every substantive aspect of its predecessors. It doesn't even aesthetically look like a Toy Story movie. Toy Story 4 is an obvious black sheep for the franchise in just about every way, including its aspect ratio of all things. It does not fit. It starkly stands apart from the original trilogy, and it's like they're trying to jam a piece from a completely different jigsaw puzzle into one which was already completed and framed on the wall of a museum for all of eternity. In fact, they wrote an entire book about the evolution of these films, as well as the technology and people who made them over the course of this completed trilogy. It feels like a fan fiction in that, much like fan-written works, which are inherently not bound to pre-established canon, this movie is far more concerned with telling its own story with its own themes and its own ideas of who these characters should be than it is with meaningfully and logically progressing the Toy Story series. I'm sure it's no coincidence this is the only film in the series which, including Toy Story 5, doesn't include some form of imaginative playtime in its opening sequences, doesn't either show or at least acknowledge the existence of both Zurg and Buzz's role as a space ranger, and shockingly doesn't even feature an actual Pizza Planet truck. Also including Toy Story 5, because I most certainly do not count the tattoo on the back of this guy's leg. Guys, this is Toy Story. You don't have to be sneaky about where you add the Pizza Planet truck. You're literally taking the characters on a road trip. You have more of an excuse than ever before to just put it, I kept returning to this movie time after time because I wanted to see what other people loved so much about it. Each and every time I think, hey man, maybe this time will be different. But it always ends the same way. Wombo-comboing me with as much insulting characterization and incompetent plotting as possible, and it never stops. It never, ever lets up off the gas. It starts out so good, reels me in and wraps itself around my heart like a warm blanket of nostalgia, but then starts slowly whittling away at the fabric, and by the end, the toys are on the verge of committing vehicular manslaughter, and the characters I fell in love with as a kid have betrayed anything and everything they ever stood for. One of the most fascinating things about Toy Story 4 is that, when you look past all the fan service, it becomes clear that they made no attempts to be sneaky or deceptive about what their intentions were here. The opening flashback prologue is wholly emblematic of everything that's wrong with this film. Nearly every single supporting character we care about is left behind in Andy's room. Buzz and Jessie are the only toys apart from Woody and Bo that the writers even pretend to care about, with Buzz being especially useless. He's literally just standing there like a scarecrow doing nothing. Bo's character has been radically changed from who we knew her to be in the first 2 movies. Woody seriously considers the idea of abandoning Andy and running off with Bo Peep. Everything I just mentioned is strung together with music ripped directly from the original trilogy and therefore divorced from its original thematic significance, and as the cherry on top, well, take it away, fellas!
If you really break it down, none of this makes any sense.
Even the fact that this entire opening sequence is taking place during a monstrous thunderstorm is just poetry. It's such a perfect omen of things to come. There's no trickery here. They wave every single red flag they have in their arsenal right in your face, out of the gate, and are unabashedly transparent about exactly what they're setting out to do with Toy Story 4, and then they just keep piling on top with more egregious acts of character assassination, more egregiously bankrupt messaging, more egregiously broken plotting, more egregious waste of potential with world building. They just keep building and building until it eventually becomes too much to sustain and the film completely collapses under the weight of its ambitions. And yet, even with all of that, I don't think I can say that I hate Toy Story 4. If that were truly the case, I wouldn't have watched it as many times as I have. Content related or not, I cannot bring myself to engage with something if doing so is actively and significantly detrimental for me. If you want an actual example of what that kind of movie would be like, well, I don't know what it's like to be trampled by a stampede of wildebeests, but I bet it's not unlike the feeling I get when enduring Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. Having to look at the clips I used in this video was already painful enough. I thought you had to be in creative mode to sink lower than bedrock, but apparently I was wrong. I never, ever want to watch that shit in my entire life ever again. But that's not the case for Toy Story 4. Why? Well, for one thing, Toy Story 4 is the film that allowed me to find an audience on YouTube. What started as an unhinged rant I never really expected to be seen by many people at all miraculously got pushed into YouTube's algorithm, and before I knew it, I went from getting maybe a few hundred views on my videos to thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, eventually ballooning into a supercut that somehow found its way to over 1 million people and created a consistent revenue stream for me across my channel. But there are more deep-seated reasons for why I no longer hate Toy Story 4 than just that. Part of my paralytic inability to process what I'd watched in theaters on June 21st, 2019 stemmed from the fact that I hadn't consciously realized why I cared about these movies so much. How could I wrap my head around what I'd lost when I didn't even understand what I had? If you asked me why I loved the Toy Story trilogy before Toy Story 4 came out, I would not have been able to give you a proper answer because a lot of the more substantive aspects just flew right over my head when I was a kid. I was way more captivated by the airport chase from Toy Story 2, for example, than I was the When She Loved Me montage. But watching the movies as an adult for the purpose of making How Toy Story 4 Destroyed Everything was seriously like watching them all for the very first time ever. The nuances of Buzz's arc destroyed me. The implications of Jesse's backstory and how it thematically ties into Woody's arc obliterated me. Fully understanding the mechanics supporting each individual toy's journey across the trilogy made the entire third act of Toy Story 3 emotionally wreck me more than it ever had before. You know, when I decided to throw all of my eggs into the YouTube basket back in summer of 2022, I feared that by fixating so much of my online identity around this series and spending what probably amounts to thousands of hours of my life staring at the same footage over and over and over and over again for the last 4 years, I'd eventually get sick of, or worse, begin to outright resent something I once loved so dearly. But it turns out that making these videos has only further strengthened the love I have for Toy Story, because putting those movies under the same microscope I used to eviscerate Toy Story 4 allowed me to properly articulate why they all hold up so well, where their strengths and weaknesses lie, and why they all mean as much to me as they do. I truly believe that were it not for this movie being made, I would not have the same prestigious reverence for the first 3 films that I do because I'd been taking it all for granted up until then. And not only did that introspection carry forward to the rest of Pixar's filmography as I found the ability to formulate reasoning for why I loved some and hated others as much as I did, but attracting an audience of fellow animation and movie enthusiasts through that Toy Story 4 series basically apparently all of whom had a more refined media palette than I did from what I can tell, led me to reevaluating the scale through which I assessed movies in general, and diving a little deeper down the film connoisseur rabbit hole, gradually expanding my film diet beyond the narrow scope of stories I'd been exposed to throughout most of my life, as would be readily apparent to anyone who watched my original best and worst videos from 2022, which, yeah, I can see why people weren't particularly impressed by those. The recency bias here is, in fact, perhaps the biggest positive to come out of Toy Story 4's existence is directly related to those older videos. The reason I was able to speak so earnestly about what Pixar was trying to do with Woody's character, and why I believe people resonate so strongly with that messaging regardless of how well it was executed, is because I've been down that road myself. My Toy Story 4 series snuck its way into the algorithm at a time in my life when I was in an eerily similar position to Woody. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I didn't start out making critique videos. I was a Let's Player, who also occasionally made analysis content if he felt like it. And for about 5 or 6 years, I loved it. I never put too much thought or effort into the videos because I knew nobody was really watching them. It was just something that I did for fun after school, be it with my friends or by myself, and that was really all I ever expected it to be. But once the pandemic hit and people suddenly found themselves with a lot more free time than they used to, a couple of my more negative playthroughs started to gain traction for the abrasive, unfiltered personality I put on display because people found that really cathartic to watch. Unfortunately, I took all the wrong lessons away from that reception, and without even realizing what I was doing, I eventually found myself exclusively Let's Playing games I knew I was probably going to hate, crossing the line from ranting performatively for the sake of entertainment and allowing that rage to consume my entire personality, dishing out toxically hostile personal attacks toward anyone who either made the things I hated or simply enjoyed them, labeling them all as brain-dead fanboys, even if all they were doing was trying to help me. I draw the comparison to Woody's arc in Toy Story 4 because much like how he's searching for a new purpose throughout the movie, I was looking for a way out of the hole I dug for myself. I felt so deeply committed to the direction the channel had taken, it was easier for me to just quadruple down on everything than ever honestly self-reflect on what a more healthy, productive, and fulfilling path to take would be. In short, I lost myself. I lost why I started making videos in the first place, I lost the kind of person I was, and I lost sight of the types of things I wanted to create, ultimately becoming a deeply unpleasant person to be around online. And I ascribe me finally snapping out of my trance to my Toy Story 4 series having the reach that it did, especially once I made the supercut, attracting a bigger audience who held up a mirror to the way I was acting. I woke up to the fact that focusing exclusively on creating mean-spirited rant videos was genuinely poison for my brain, and it came to a head with my Cars on the Road analysis when I realized I simply wasn't getting enjoyment out of creating that type of content anymore, if I ever really was. That's why I dedicated the next year of my life entirely to a gigantic 8-hour-long Owl House love letter, deviating only for commentaries with friends, the yearly Pixar release, and special circumstances. I knew I was covering a show that most of my audience likely didn't care about, but I just needed to create something more akin to those first few critique videos I made to at least start making a change for the better. Given just how insufferable I had become, and how long these two identities had been vying for space in my head, there was a very long road I needed to traverse internally over the last couple years to get back in touch with who I actually wanted to be. That journey has most certainly not been flawless, nor am I naive enough to believe it's even been fully completed yet. But I do believe that I'm constantly striving to improve both myself and my content every day, such that when I do make more critical videos like what you've watched today, or 2 other things I have planned for this year, I can proudly stand behind them just as I would for my love letters as respectful, but hopefully still entertaining breakdowns instead of scornful hit pieces that make people seem stupid for enjoying the media in question. And what matters most to me is that I'm doing it for my own peace of mind, for my own satisfaction, to be able to look myself in the mirror and feel happy with where I am, instead of primarily vying for the approval of anyone or anything else the way I once was. So if there's a game people really want to see me play that I couldn't possibly give less of a shit about, I can just say, no thanks, I'm good. And if there's a game I'm dying to play that my audience has no idea even exists, I can just decide to cover it and feel absolutely zero shame in doing so. That mindset is what has allowed me to gain a newfound appreciation for games that once tormented me, because I'm actually allowing myself the time to meet a game halfway and learn what makes it tick instead of letting my hot-headedness get in the way of slowing down and properly engaging with its mechanics. Not to say I've magically developed an unbridled, passionate love for all of them, but some have actually snuck their way onto my list of all-time favorites, which is one of many reasons why those original best and worst videos I mentioned before are so horrifically outdated. That's also why I've recently started streaming playthroughs on my second channel of everything I originally labeled as being the worst games ever made, to give them a proper chance instead of just spouting malignant bullshit for an hour straight. And obvious as it may sound, going in with a more pleasant attitude has allowed me to come away with more positive impressions. Well, most of the time anyway. Other times, not so much. And along this journey of self-reflection, we've managed to create an entire community of people who share the passion I have for these kinds of stories. It is an eternally humbling experience whenever I check in on my Discord server and see people casually chatting about the latest films, games, or general news together, hosting watch parties, seeing the sub-communities that have formed, and generally seeing people forming connections some might not have been fortunate enough to find in their day-to-day lives. I still haven't fully wrapped my head around how this all happened. How me screaming my head off about Toy Story 4 for 6 hours, 6 minutes, and 51 seconds caused a domino effect that allowed me to meet some of the best friends I've ever had, as well as other awesome creators across the YouTube and animation sphere who I never ever thought I'd get the chance to talk to, and ultimately continuing to be able to share the things I'm passionate about with anyone who's willing to listen. None of that would have ever happened were it not for Toy Story 4 being released on June 21st, 2019. This movie has officially created far more positive memories in my life than it has negative ones. So when I watch it today, even though I have to completely divorce the film from the ones which preceded to do this, I'm finally able to connect with it in a way I never could previously. And you probably never thought you'd hear me, of all people, say these words, but I can actually enjoy watching Toy Story 4. Part of that is just because watching it brings me back to the summer before my senior year of high school. Part of it comes from making fun of the extremely silly things, and another part of it comes from the knowledge that Toy Story 5's existence has already totally undercut this finale, but most of it does come from a genuine appreciation for the craftsmanship on display in several major scenes. It's taken me a long time to truly process the emotional response I had that summer, but by this point, I've developed something of a gentlemanly respect for both the film itself and the people who made it. So I'd like to take this time to say to Josh Cooley and the entire Toy Story 4 team, from the bottom of my heart, thank you to infinity and beyond for putting this movie out into the world. I haven't magically had a change of heart on it being a good movie, and by now I think it's safe to say I never will, but on a personal level, you have my thanks. Without Toy Story 4, I'd probably still be lost in the weeds of random anime games I didn't care about but knew people wanted me to tear apart for how batshit insane they were, or screaming my head off at phenomenal platforming experiences I was too heedless and impetuous to fully appreciate. But thanks to this film, I'm not lost. Not anymore. Okay, I think think this time I actually am out of things to say about Toy Story 4, which means that is officially a wrap on my coverage of all theatrically released Toy Story films in a style far more consistent with how I want to present myself moving forward. When I uploaded part 1 of my Toy Story 4 series all the way back in October of 2021, I had absolutely no idea I'd eventually end up making extensive analysis videos for every single Toy Story movie on the channel. It's been one hell of a ride with a lot of ups and a whole lot of downs, but considering all the good that's come out of this whole thing, I wouldn't have missed it for the world. I am eternally grateful for how Toy Story 4 changed me and my life for the better. I'm glad Josh Cooley's time at Pixar eventually led to us getting Transformers 1 from Paramount, and I'm glad he now gets to move on to even better things like You're really not making it easy for me, you know that? Thanks for watching, everyone, and thank you for bearing with my narration considering I recorded about 90% of it while recovering from bronchitis, so apologies for being even more nasally than usual. Extra special thank you to my patrons and YouTube members for supporting the channel, as well as Gugonic for doing the motion tracking on the opening shots of Woody and RC, and I hope to see you all soon for whatever it is you decide to watch next. Goodbye!